Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, when I say cloud applications, what does it exactly mean? So when I say cloud applications, what am I referring to? Am I referring to a separate set of applications or application type? Not exactly. Cloud is just a hosting platform. It doesn't have separate applications. When I talk about the application types, your applications are typically, these are the type of applications. So when I say type of applications, they are monolithic applications. Then you have microservices or microservices based applications. Then there's a third type, which is applications that are containerized. Containerized applications, applications which have been packaged into a container. They could be microservices, and they are hosted. So we typically use Dockers, we use containers, and we use Kubernetes to manage containerized applications. So these are my type of applications. Then I also use the word which is cloud native application. So I also say that we have cloud native application. What do we mean by cloud native application? First of all, let's get started with the first, which is monolithic application. Can somebody explain what is a monolithic application? Or what do you consider, or what do you understand by the word monolithic application? What is monolithic application, guys? No input?
Maybe something like built upon, like we have these architectures wherein everything is built upon, like all-in-one architecture is what we say usually, rather than calling it as distributed or clustered architecture.
Mhm.
Something which is all-in-one, like a single machine or piece of hardware has all the configurations posted for a particular application, all the services for an application.
Okay. Anyone else?
It's the type of applications where multiple components are combined into one application.
Okay.
Like most of like Netflix.
Okay. So what is a monolithic application? Let's first understand, guys. Monolithic basically means application. So basically, first of all, monolithic application could be any tier application. It could be a single tier, which means on the same system, all the application tiers, application components are installed. An application typically have a front end, a middle tier, and a backend tier. So could be a single server, single tier application. It could be a two-tier application, which means there are two servers. One is hosting the front end, the other is hosting the backend. And if there's a middle tier is co-located either on the front end or on the backend. You could have a three-tier application also. These are the typical tiers of the application. Three-tier application, which means you have a separate. So three-tier application would basically mean here you have a front end, which is typically your web services, which is Apache IIS Tomcat. Then you have a middle tier, that is where your middleware exists, and then you have a backend tier, that is where your database basically runs, and in the middle tier, your actually application components are there. So this is the example of monolithic application. Now, how do we characterize a monolithic application? It basically means that all the components are interdependent. The components have interdependency, which means if I just remove one of the component, the entire application will stop working, or there will be partial, performance issues. So either it will partially stop working or it will completely stop working. For example, what will happen if I remove the front end of an application? So there is an application which has a front end, middle tier, and back end. Tell me what will happen if I remove the front end?
Users won't be able to access the site at, using web or any kind of what you can say, the customers who want to reach out the site or any kind of website, it won't work. So website will go down basically. Yeah.
Let's
In the
understand this
front end.
image. This will answer the question. All right. This is an example of a 3-tier application hosted in Microsoft Azure, which is configured with appropriate security controls, which is load balanced at the same time because it's a production critical application for business. The application URL is www.cloudexpert.com. Let's understand the communication, how the communication is happening here. So the end user on his or her system is opening a browser, typing cloudexpert.com. That cloudexpert.com is a domain, the DNS resolution happens, and cloudexpert.com is resolved with an IP address, which is here. So the request goes to the internet, it is resolved with this IP address, and over the internet, the request goes through multiple routers, and it is finally routed to the service which is hosting that public IP. The IP with which cloudexpert.com is resolved. That service happens to be a load balancer. From that load balancer, the traffic gets distributed, traffic gets forwarded to one of the web servers, which is hosting the web services for the application or front end for the application. And depending on what user is trying to access on the application, the further communication happens. If user is trying to access some data, some historical data, or user is trying to access some videos or some images, which is stored in the database, then the traffic will get forwarded to one of the web servers. From there, it will go to the load balancer, which is front-ending the app tier, which is the internal load balancer. The load balancer will forward the traffic to one of the app server. And from there, the traffic will go to the load balancer, which is front-ending the database. And from there, it goes to one of the server, which is hosting the document. And that's how the reverse will also follow the same process. So this is how the communication is happening. Now to ensure security, what the architect, whosoever has designed this diagram, what that architect has done, the architect is using the virtual firewall, which is network security group in Azure. And with the help of virtual firewall, architect is enabling the communication from front end to middle tier and from middle tier to back end tier, or any direct communication from front end to the back end tier is basically restricted, prohibited, is blocked by network security group. And this is a security measurement because the front end tier is exposed to the internet. If there is any ransomware attack, any malware that has to come into the network, it will affect the front end. And since front end has no direct communication with the back end where the actual data is stored, the impact will not reach to the backend. The malware has to propagate in the network and follow the same path. And by that time, the security monitoring team, the SOC solution like Sentinel, Microsoft Defender for endpoint, will be able to actually detect this behavior, the malware in the network. So you're trying to delay. Security is not always about providing 100% protection to a use case. It is also about delaying the process so that you get some lead time to get into action and to minimize the impact, reduce the impact of it. So that's the secure design. Now, let's say the front end is not available. Let's say this entire front end is not there. What will happen? Will my user be able to communicate with the application? will they be able to get to the landing page of the application? Yes, no, maybe.
No, he won't be able to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The user will probably get page cannot be displayed, resource not found, HTTP 404 error, because front end is down. Okay, so when the front end is down, user is not able to use the application. Now let's say the front end is available. However, the middle tier is down. Now tell me, will the user be able to access the application?
No, because it is all interconnected.
Okay, user will still be able to land on the landing page of the application, which is the home page. However, not all the functionalities will be displayed on the home page because that would also require the app tier to function. Right? So it will be partial access to the user. Makes sense? But user won't be able to do anything. Now let's assume that the middle tier is also available. Only the backend tier is not available. So the backend tier is down. The front end and middle tier are perfectly up and running. Now tell me, will the user be able to access the application and be able to perform all that user intends to do that?
Yeah, no, just like the middleware was down. If the middleware goes down, then some of the functionalities user will be able to do, but related to database functionalities, he won't be able to perform or any kind. The user won't be able to get anything.
Absolutely. That's exactly what is a monolithic application is, which has a huge dependency between tiers. All the tiers of a monolithic application, they are interdependent, and unavailability of one of the tier may either bring the application down completely or may result in partial performance of the application. That's what monolithic application is all about. So monolithic application is a traditional application architecture that has been in use for a long time. And even today, we build monolithic applications for specific use cases. So that's what about monolithic applications, right? Then comes microservices based applications. Now, what is a microservice based application? Can somebody explain? Okay, so microservices based applications is I would say is an advanced technology, or it's an advanced application design concept wherein you will break an application, a three-tier application. Let's say a three-tier application will be broken into multiple smaller modules. Those modules are known as microservices, and each module runs independently of the other module. Second, these microservices are platform neutral, platform independent. You can move that application from .NET to Java to PHP to Azure to AWS to GCP and bring it back to on-premises with minimal or no effort. That's what microservices is all about. It's a newer way of designing applications. Then comes containerized applications. Now, microservices can be deployed in a serverless infrastructure. You can deploy microservices in Azure functions. You can deploy microservices, I would say, on the top of virtual machines also. However, there is another technology which is containerization. You can containerize microservices applications into containers, and containers will be managed and maintained by Kubernetes when there are multiple containers. Then comes cloud native applications. What is a cloud native application? Cloud native application is also microservices based. However, you build these applications using native cloud offerings. That's what cloud native application is all about. You build them using native cloud offerings. So if you talk about Microsoft Azure and let's say you say that I'm going cloud native, it basically means that the entire application development lifecycle would involve using services from Microsoft Azure. You will not look above and beyond Microsoft Azure for any application related capability, characteristics, or features. So you will choose Azure DevOps pipeline. You will choose Azure platform for development. Azure will provide you Visual Studio. It will provide you programming platform. Azure will provide you security features like firewall, web application firewall, load balancing. Azure will provide you DNS capabilities. Azure, in fact, will provide you encryption, secrets management. Azure will provide you, the domain name also. So cloud native basically means, in a layman terminology, that's sticking to the cloud offerings and building an experience for a specific use case. That's what cloud native is. So these are the type of applications that we typically deal with. Any questions, guys, so far?
Yes, I do have one question. So in
Yeah,
cloud
please go
native
ahead.
application,
Hmm.
can we use the components for multiple cloud platforms like using Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud? Okay, so I,
Absolutely.
I I don't want to go uh, with all
Hmm.
the offerings one cloud is providing. I want to
Hmm.
go the best offerings which each and every cloud is providing. So uh, can I go with all of them in the basic of the best components they are providing?
You can absolutely do that. However,
Okay.
there will be some challenges. The challenges related to the integration. When you
Right.
make use of services and components from multiple clouds, there could be an integration challenge. There could be
Okay.
a connectivity issue. And
Right.
then you will also have the challenges with respect to the failure. What if your application, let's say you build a microservices based cloud native application, which is using identity and which is using authentication and authorization from Azure, but the front end and middle tier is hosted in Azure, in AWS, and you are making use of Cloud SQL service from Google Cloud. So your application is actually using multiple clouds. What if Cloud SQL is down? What if Azure is down? What if AWS is down? What if there are API communication challenges between Azure and GCP? So you need to figure out that uncertainty. So you are absolutely right, wherein you want to reduce the overall cost of deployment and maintenance and hosting in the long run by making use of best of the best services and also cheaper. But at the same time, you need to factor in the uncertainty concept, context that it may bring in the long run when you have an application configured across multiple cloud platform. Yes, it will still be considered cloud native because you are not looking beyond cloud. You will still be using the cloud. In fact, you can also bring in a flavor of private cloud also. So probably the public cloud is hosting the front end and middle tier and the management layer, and the private cloud that is local to your corporate data center is hosting the backend tier, which is the database, which is mission critical to your application. You can also do that. Nobody will stop you.
Okay.
However, make sure that you take into consideration the challenges that I will be talking about, which is key security considerations and risk associated with cloud applications. If you can figure out a solution around these two factors, you're good to go to build an application as per your design principles.
Okay.
Make sense?
Understood. Yes. Yes.
Great.
Understood. Thank you.
Let's move on, guys. So, as I said, these are the type of applications. Yeah. Just speak a bit louder.
Difference between microservices and the modular application. I would say the same thing, but there is a difference.
There's a huge difference. Microservices based applications. That's it. Microservices based applications are basically built So microservices is our newest technology. I'm saying monolithic is a traditional method of building applications wherein you distribute application across multiple components, multiple tiers, and then it has its own pros and cons. Then the technology evolved over a period of time wherein microservices were introduced. Now, the benefit of microservices is that you can build an application, let's say in on-premises, and you can quickly migrate that application into cloud with minimal or no changes. You can have your application simultaneously hosted in multiple clouds. You can have your application tiers configured across multiple clouds. So microservices gives you more freedom to experiment and to provide a comprehensive experience to end users. So microservices always has an edge over monolithic. And then comes cloud native, which basically means that now that you know that you want to build application based on microservices, but what will be your hosted environment? Where exactly are you hosting it? And what components you are bringing in from where? That's when cloud native comes into the picture. That cloud is a platform that gives you access to all the components. You just need to pick and choose components from cloud, make use of them, and then build the application in cloud. That way, you will reduce the overall deployment cost, maintenance cost, hosting cost, and you will have larger aspect of security. And the best part is whenever you feel that you don't want to continue with cloud, you start with Microsoft Azure. Uh, Azure has been experiencing a lot of outages, which is really affecting your business, and you decide to migrate to Google Cloud or AWS Cloud. Microservices are small pieces. You can quickly migrate them without any platform restriction. That's the benefit. Okay. So let's move on, guys. So we want to understand the cloud applications. Now we have seen the type of applications. Now, when you are deploying those applications into cloud, you first need to understand how cloud functions. This is something that we have already discussed yesterday, when I talked about the deployment model, which is public cloud, private cloud, and hybrid cloud, right? And community cloud. So when you are deploying applications in the cloud, you need to make a choice whether you are deploying your application in a public cloud, in a private cloud, or a combination of both, which is hybrid cloud, or you are going with community cloud. That's your choice that you need to make. After that, you need to make a choice. Let's say you made a choice that I want to deploy my application in public cloud. Now, public cloud offers me 3 service delivery models. So you need to make a choice. The next choice is to identify which service delivery model are you going with. Are you going to deploy your application in IaaS mode, which means you will manage and maintain the underlying infrastructure that your application will primarily be depending on or will be hosted on. PaaS, which means you will just focus on your application and data, and the underlying infrastructure will be the responsibility of cloud service provider. SaaS, you will decide whether you want to take advantage of a ready-made, readily available application or experience which is already made available by the service provider. So this is another decision-making factor in cloud applications, that first you need to decide which cloud you are going with, which cloud type you're going with, and then what service delivery model in that cloud type you proceed with. Then comes the shared responsibility model that we have discussed yesterday, that while you deploy an application in cloud, and after you have decided that you will go with, let's say, PaaS, platform as a service, then understand the shared security responsibility model also, because that will help you understand the responsibility that you have on your shoulders with respect to identities, with respect to network, with respect to data, with respect to storage, with respect to physical security, with respect to any other security control that needs to go in the application from day one. It cannot happen that you make a decision after the application is released to production. You will need to do that during the design phase itself. So during the design phase, you will need to identify what service delivery model from which cloud type I am primarily looking at to host my application. If it is cloud native application, it will always be a combination of PaaS and SaaS. Cloud native applications do not go on IaaS. IaaS is primarily meant for lift and shift, which means you bring something from on premises and you dump it into the cloud. Though it is not a recommended model, lift and shift or infrastructure as a service, but ironically, this is the most widely used method of migrating to cloud or hosting services in cloud. And that's where application modernization comes into the picture, wherein you have architects who will suggest you to migrate from one service delivery model to another, or migrate from one application architecture, which is monolithic, to microservices based application. That is known as application modernization, which includes re-architecting the application, re-platforming the application. That's what the modernization part is, which is very important. Now, what are the key components of a cloud application? So as I said, cloud is just an addition to the infrastructure or to the hosting platform. Rest of the characteristics or design principle remain the same. So there is a concept of application design principles. There are 12 design principles. You can go through those design principles. They are equally important in application development also. Whether those applications are being deployed, developed for cloud, or whether they are being deployed, developed for on-premises. In fact, design principle does not accommodate the underlying or the future hosted infrastructure. So what are my design principles or key components or key expectations or key tenets for my cloud applications? So my first component is scalability. See, this is where you need to understand the benefits of cloud. While you are designing applications for cloud, you would want to make sure that you take 100% advantage of the benefits that cloud offers over traditional on-premises infrastructure. And one of those benefits is scalability. So your applications must be scalable. And that's where cloud applications are incredibly scalable, easily accommodating the challenging needs of a business. Whether it's an increase in user or data, cloud applications can adapt without significant downtime. They can quickly adapt. So if you deploy an application in cloud, you will take advantage of scalability. Scalability is of two types here. What are the two types of scalability, guys?
Vertical and horizontal.
Right. Vertical
Horizontal
and vertical.
and vertical. What is horizontal and vertical? First of all, what is horizontal scalability?
Horizontal is increasing the number of resources like VM or the vertical
increasing the count of resources, and when we increase, we create identical resources. So let's say you have an application, the same example that I have given here. Right now, if I go with horizontal scalability, let's say I want to go with horizontal scalability, what I will do in that case, whenever I feel that one of the component of my application is overused, or there is a sudden increase in ingress traffic, and my existing infrastructure is overoccupied. The CPU and memory utilization, the capability to handle concurrent user sessions is all overoccupied. What I will do, I will quickly provision another virtual machine here, which is identical to the other two virtual machines, exactly a replica of other two. That is known as horizontal scaling. The vertical scaling basically means that I have a virtual machine, this virtual machine, and I want to vertically scale it. What I will do, I will increase the resources of this virtual machine. So probably I will allocate more CPU and memory to this virtual machine, and that will become by vertical scaling. So this virtual machine goes with 2 CPU core, 4 GB RAM. I will make the resources double, 4 CPU core, 8 GB RAM. That's vertical scaling. This is horizontal scaling. Now, when it comes to auto scaling, what kind of feature we go with? In case of an auto scaling, do we use vertical scaling or horizontal scaling?
Horizontal scaling.
Absolutely. We go with horizontal scaling. So when it comes to auto scaling or scalable applications in cloud, we always go with auto scaling with horizontal. So we typically have a golden image that contains the bare minimum, that is a replica of your existing system. So I will have a golden image for my web subnet, my app subnet. Data subnet, you don't typically go with golden image. You typically use database level high availability features, which is SQL always on and other features, which has the capability to provision additional instances as and when needed. When it comes to the auto scaling is typically done for the front end and middle tier. So Azure supports auto scaling, and the name of the service that supports auto scaling in Azure is known as VMSS, Virtual Machine Scale Sets. That's the auto scaling service in Azure. Using this service, you can create a horizontal scaling. You can deploy a highly scalable application that can handle sudden spike in traffic, sudden increase in user traffic. That's what scalability is. So scalability is a very important aspect of cloud applications. Then comes security. Security is also one of the benefit of cloud computing, and hence your applications must leverage that benefit. So cloud provides you multiple security controls, layered security controls. Your application must comply to those layered security controls, which are encryption, access controls, regular security updates. So your application data must be encrypted at rest. Access control must be created so that only limited individuals or limited accounts have access to your application and its configuration. And you must perform regular security updates, patching, so that it remains secure. So that's what you need to do. You also need to ensure compliance and privacy. If your application provides a specific behavior that is controlled by a regulatory standard or a compliance, let's say your application has the capability of accepting credit card payments from your customers, your application should adhere to PCI DSS. Your application is, belongs to a healthcare, and it basically captures personal identifiable information of a customer along with protected health information, which includes any surgery that the customer underwent recently, any medicines that the customer is taking periodically, any allergy that the customer has to certain foods, any health related information. If your application is storing or processing, it has to comply to the health related compliances. Let's say your application is hosted in United States, or your application processes data of citizens of United States, then you need to comply with California Consumer Privacy Act. You need to comply with HIPAA, which is Health Information Act, and you also need to comply with PCI DSS. So depending on the behavior that your application exhibits, multiple standards and compliances will needs to be adhered to. That's what security is all about. Then comes integration. Cloud applications offer seamless integration with other systems and services, fostering interoperability and data exchange across platforms and devices. So yes, cloud applications can easily be integrated. For example, Azure Storage Account. You can access your Azure Storage account through API calls, through public endpoint, which is a URL that you get, and you can also have applications configured to communicate with Azure Storage Account for the purpose of reading data or dumping data into it. So it provides integration. Applications like Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Microsoft Sentinel, Microsoft Defender for 365. They also provide integration capabilities with outside of Azure, endpoints and systems that can be integrated with these applications. So these are my key components or key tenets of cloud applications. Next, what are my advantages of cloud applications? So my first advantage that I get, so that scalability, high availability, fault tolerance, security, those are also the advantages. And some additional are cost efficiency. Obviously, now I would not say that you will always get cost benefit by building your applications in cloud or by migrating your applications in cloud. Cloud can also burn a deep hole in your pocket if you do not configure the services as per the best practices. If you underutilize and over provision the services, it can actually go drastic. So cost efficiency is all about FinOps, finance operations, or adhering to cost optimization best practices, deploying services only when they are needed, looking at resource utilization, having proper monitoring and logging in place so that you get alerted as and when something deviates from the expected standards. That is actually important. Flexibility and mobility. Yes, your applications are mobile. You can, access cloud applications from any locations. You can in fact migrate applications from one cloud to another or to on premises with minimum or no effort. So that's flexibility and monitoring, mobility you get. Automatic updates. Your applications are regularly updated by the service providers, ensuring users have access to the latest features, security patches and improvements. Now, this does not hold true for all the applications. Depending on the service delivery model, this will differ. So in case of SaaS, yes, it is automatic updates. You never update Microsoft Office. You never update your mailboxes. It's all done by Microsoft in the backend. In case of PaaS, you will have a shared responsibility. They will update, but you will tell when to do that. In case of IaaS, there is no automatic update. You will need to update it yourself. However, now Microsoft Azure, similar to AWS and GCP, provides a feature wherein you can enable automatic updates that will run on your virtual machines in the backend. And for any major update, you will be doing it manually. That's what automatic updates is all about. Data protection, which is another benefit of cloud applications, that in order to protect data, they implement robust security measures, including encryption. All cloud service providers encrypt your data by default using their default encryption keys, even though you don't go with it. So it includes encryption, access control, regular security updates to safeguard sensitive data and ensure compliance with regulations. In fact, cloud service providers now offer services like Purview, Macy, security and compliance, beyond trust capabilities in Azure, AWS, and GCP, wherein you can also discover and identify and label sensitive data and have data leak prevention policies configured against that data and have an integration with your existing SOC solutions so that whenever there are data leak incidents, they are either configured for monitoring or they are enforced so that you can reduce those incidents. Compliance management. Cloud applications or cloud infrastructure is by default compliant to major security standards and regulations. For example, cloud data centers in Europe, they are by default compliant to GDPR, PCI DSS, and other local regulatory standards there. Similarly, cloud data centers in United States, they're compliant to HIPAA, FISMA, California Privacy Act, and other local compliances and regulatory standards in US. Cloud data centers are in India. They're also compliant to Indian government standards. So compliance management is easy. The most important is disaster recovery. For a business, availability is of utmost importance, especially when you are in e-commerce business or when you are supporting applications which are very sensitive, applications that does, let's say earthquake monitoring, applications that are doing monitoring for various natural changes that happens, applications which are processing, humongous data every second, like IoT applications, manufacturing plant applications. Those applications need to go with the least RPO and RTOs. So as in when there is a breakage, there is a downtime, or there's a disaster that happens at the hosted infrastructure, the application should be accessible from a disaster recovery site, from a secondary site with minimal or no data loss. That's the capability that cloud applications can provide, or cloud can actually provide. So what is the application in Microsoft Azure for managing disaster recovery? What is the application, guys, in Microsoft Azure that we use to manage disaster recovery, or that we use to recover from a disaster that happens at the hosted infrastructure?
Is it Azure backups?
No, backup is for backup only. Okay, so the application that we have in Azure is Azure Site Recovery, and it is integrated with Recovery Services Vault. Recovery Services Vault is the service that is used for backup and disaster recovery. So that's Recovery Services Vault actually, and that contains the Azure Site Recovery in the backend. Right. So guys, as I said, it is very important that you have good knowledge around Azure fundamentals and administration, the knowledge around core services of Microsoft Azure. If you don't have, trust me, you will not be able to excel in security domain. You can only secure a service when you have good knowledge around that service. I'm saying if I make you an in charge of securing, let's say, the Gateway of India in Mumbai, and if you have not seen Gateway of India from every nook and corner, you will not be able to secure it. Just by looking at it, you cannot secure it. You have to make sure that you visit the place from every nook and corner. You look at all the entries and exit points. You understand all the stronger and weaker points. You do a comprehensive analysis and review of your service. Then only you can secure it. So that is very important, guys. Okay, now what are my key security considerations for cloud applications? A very important aspect. So when it comes to key security considerations, the very first thing is, see, in today's age, application can be recovered. You can rebuild an application. It is just a matter of time. It may probably take from a few minutes to a couple of hours. However, you cannot get the data back once it is stolen. You cannot regain your data once it is leaked. So data is of utmost priority today, because these days businesses follow no paper policy, which means you are not maintaining any record, any data on a piece of paper. Your license is key, your secrets, your SSL certificates, your encryption keys, your mission critical data, contracts, customer information, payment information, everything is stored in a virtual storage system, or everything is stored into a virtual storage repository. That repository could be a VMware storage, it could be a cloud storage, it's all virtual. You're not maintaining it on a piece of paper. So it becomes more important than ever to have your data secure. And for that, we must ensure that my data is encrypted. See, if I write down some classified data on a piece of paper, I will just put that piece of paper in a safe lock, in a safe, and I lock it and I keep the key with myself. The same thing I will do in cloud, which is encryption. I will use a key to encrypt the data and store that key securely so that nobody has access to the key, because whosoever has access to the key will have access to the data. So data encryption is very important when it comes to security in cloud, and it is not only for data at rest, it is for data in transit as well as data in use. Then comes access control, another important feature. There was a survey from Gartner, and the survey said that 90% of the security incidents that were reported in the last 5 years were a result of identity misconfiguration. This was a bold statement by Gartner. 90% of the security incidents were a result of identity misconfiguration. In fact, we are going to study about OWASP's top 10 application security vulnerabilities. The first domain in OWASP's top 10 application security vulnerability is broken access control, which is also related to identity misconfiguration. So, how strong you are in cybersecurity or cloud security will be a reflection of how strong you are in identity and access management. If you have strong background into identity and access management, trust me, you can prevent 90% of the security incident in your environment. So that is where access control is very important. And access control basically refers to a strategy, a process, a framework that follows the principle of access control best practices, which are least privilege principle, zero trust, separation of duty, privileged access management, privileged identity management, single sign-off, identity federation, multi-factor authentication, all that. They are all
Hello, Raghuveer, your voice is not coming. Hello. Is anybody else can hear me?
Yes, Kunal. I'm
okay.
able to.
I got kicked off from Microsoft Teams. Don't know why,
Oh,
but I'm
okay,
back.
okay, okay.
Okay, so I was talking about identity and access management, and I said identity and access management is very important when it comes to cloud applications, because 90% of the security incidents that were reported or that were identified by various XDR, MDR, EDR, Siemens source solutions, they were a result of identity misconfiguration. This report was published by Gartner and is my screen visible to everyone?
No, no, Raghuveer, no, your screen
No.
is not visible.
Not visible.
Is it visible now?
No, no,
No.
it's not
No, not
visible.
yet.
Not yet.
Give me a moment. Can you see my screen now?
Not yet. Yeah, it's visible for me.
Okay, great. So as I said, 90% of the security incidents were a result of identity misconfiguration, which means this is very important domain. And that is why both in cybersecurity as well as cloud security, identity and access management is the first and most important domain that you need to focus on. Next is infrastructure and workload security. So what are my security considerations for infrastructure and workload security that I need to be aware of? So security consideration for infrastructure security. Infrastructure basically means the machine on which my application is hosted. So to the security or the storage service which my application is using to store data. That's what infrastructure is. So to secure the underlying infrastructure of cloud environment, which includes network, servers, and storage to prevent unauthorized access and protect cyber threats. So you need to make sure that your infrastructure security has to be in place. Then comes the workload security. Workload security basically means securing the workload and the applications which are deployed inside. For example, let's say you have a virtual machine in Azure. To provide infrastructure level security for a virtual machine, you will ensure that the virtual machine doesn't have a public IP. You will ensure that the virtual machine is accessible only to identified identities. You will ensure that virtual machine has up-to-date patches. You will ensure that virtual machine is hosting latest operating system from OEM. You will ensure that virtual machine is configured with latest anti-malware, antivirus, anti-spyware, anti-adware, solutions. You will ensure that virtual machine has a host IDP, IS, IPS and IDPS configured. That's what infrastructure level security. Then comes workload level security, which is the application which are hosted in the virtual machine. So applications like Google Chrome, Adobe Acrobat, or any business application, you will need to ensure that the application is running with the latest patches, with the latest version, and there is a vulnerability discovery and assessment and management solution. So you should be using solutions like CrowdStrike vulnerability management. Vulnerability management is also part of Microsoft Defender, or vulnerability management solutions from Rapid7, Nessus, Qualys. That's what you will be using. Then comes data privacy. Very important. Now, data encryption and data privacy are two different domains altogether. Data encryption is part of data protection, and data privacy basically is a subset of data protection, which basically deals with protecting or ensuring the secrecy and confidentiality of personal data or any business specific data. So it says that they ensure that data stored in the cloud is protected from unauthorized access and that privacy measures are in place to safeguard sensitive information. So that's what you need to ensure that it is there all the time. You should have appropriate privacy measures for it. Then comes network segmentation. So these are all domains. So we started with, infrastructure and workload security. Then comes network segmentation and access control. Now, access control is basically from identity and access management perspective. And this access control that you see here is from network access perspective. The access control list, ACL, that we typically have configured in switches and routers in firewalls that allow or deny a certain traffic based on IP addresses, based on port and protocols. So you need to segment your network. And you can see here, I have a network that I created, and then I segmented that network. So for the sample application that I was presenting, you can see this application is hosted into a segmented network. In Azure, a virtual network is created. That virtual network is segmented into 3 segments, which is subnetworks, which is web subnetwork, app subnetwork, and DB subnetwork. And applications are hosted across these subnetworks based on the tier that share common characteristics, so that you can apply access control, you can apply network security groups, you can apply application security groups accordingly. That is access control all about from the networking perspective that you need to be aware of. So segment the cloud network to isolate different type of traffic and create security zones, reducing the impact of potential security breaches and limiting lateral movement by attackers. Access control policies you need to establish, and threat intelligence, which is very important, that basically comes from solutions like IDS, IPS, DOS, DDoS, advanced threat protection, APT, perimeter protection. That's what you need to do. Internet access, threat management gateways, proxies, web proxies. That's what you need to do. Then comes compliance and governance, another important aspect of cloud application security. So when it comes to compliance and governance, you should have a framework that is comprising of people, process, and technology elements, technology pillars, which defines the policies, processes, security policies and processes, and also defines the implementation guideline. Then you should have technology available to implement those processes and policies so that they remain in force. And in the end, you should have a mechanism to validate that implementation, as well as the adoption of that implementation, effectiveness of that implementation. And that all comes from audit and reporting, policy enforcement, legal and regulatory compliances. So you should have a proper audit and reporting services in place. You should perform regular audits. Regular reporting must be done. Reports must be sent to the compliance team, to the security team, or they should have access to monitoring reports, auditing reports, logs, so that they can take informed decisions. Policies must be enforced. What is the service in Microsoft Azure that we use for creating and enforcing policies? What is that service in Azure, guys, that we use for creating and enforcing policies?
Azure policy.
Yes, Azure policy. Okay, so name of the service is Azure policy. So we use Azure policy service to create and enforce policies, and we also use the same service to audit the enforcement, to audit the effectiveness of that policy from the compliance dashboard. So you will see that. Then comes legal and regulatory compliances. Legal and regulatory compliances are equally important because this will provide you an additional layer of control. Sometimes you are not able to find flaws in your design, in your configuration, in your architecture. You need a person, you need somebody else who is proficient, who is, who is knowledgeable, or who is an expert in security. That person will actually perform or validate the effectiveness of your security control. So for that, you have regulatory compliances, which when you apply or when you adhere to a regulatory compliance, it requires regular audit, wherein an external auditor comes to your premises. They will perform, they will validate, they will audit your preparedness, your configuration, services, and they will rubber stamp your approach, or they will share some opportunities for improvement that will help you minimize the security incidents in the long run. That's what legal and regulatory compliance is all about. Okay, before we move on to risk associated with cloud application, Do we have any questions on security of cloud applications or security aspects of cloud applications that we need to have in place? Or the key security considerations for cloud applications?
Raghuveer, that we discussed several aspects of security now, right?
Yep.
Is there, and then eventually you also asked which solution Azure has for, let's say, Azure policy security and all. Is
Sure.
there any common mapping that can give us a clean glimpses of which all services Azure has in all these security areas? Like,
Yeah,
is
I
there
would
any
say
picture or something?
there is no picture. I'm say there are I'm saying you have documentation available which basically talks about all Azure security services and their specific use cases. So I'll show you. Give me a moment. Okay. This is the image. This image is of Azure Enterprise Landing Zone, Azure Landing Zone architecture. This image comprises of all security services that Microsoft Azure offers across a specific cloud security domain. Or this enterprise landing zone could be your starting point to build a secure, robust, and comprehensive architecture, security architecture for your applications. So you see all the information, all the services here. So this is what you can refer. For example, you see when it comes to there is a management subscription, you see services here. I say policy assignments, Defender for Cloud. You see some common services also. So this you can refer, and that will help you to understand the security services. There is one more option, which is well-architected framework in Azure. So you can also refer to well-architected framework. This framework is built of multiple pillars, and one of them is security pillars. There are pillars like cost optimization, security, reliability, operational excellence, and performance. So you can go to security pillar, and then the security pillar basically provides you guidance in terms of how do you perform. So you also have a checklist here. So you can probably download this checklist. In fact, for example, these are the checklist. You can just download it. You can download this into a PDF. In fact, I'm saying there is another option. If you are looking for security controls, then there is another option, which is Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmarks. I'm not talking about any third party. I would like to stick to what Microsoft provides, because Microsoft provides you well-documented checklist and infrastructure that you can make use of it. So you see here, top 10 Azure security best practices. You will also have cloud security benchmark that you can download directly. These are the domains you can see. Network security domains, identity management domains, privacy, privileged access, data protection. So you just click on these domains and you will see all best practices around these domains. These are the best practices across data protection. Discover, classify, label. Now, when you click on a specific control, it also tells you the solution that you can use to implement this control. For example, for data protection, For discovery, classification, and labeling of sensitive data, you can use Microsoft Purview. You can use Azure Information Protection. So this is how you can actually navigate the Microsoft Azure documentation that will help you to create a comprehensive security framework for your organization. Obviously, one size doesn't fit all, so I cannot provide you one common document that has everything, because cloud security is a vast domain. It is a subset of cybersecurity, which will, which will take, I would say, a healthy time frame to get built and to have understood it in full detail. But these are the resources that you can do. So you can navigate to Azure Landing Zone. You can look for, I'm saying Azure Landing Zone. You can look for the checklist, which I talked about, and you can also look for cloud security benchmarks, MCSB, which is Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmarks, which was earlier known as Azure Security Benchmarks or Azure Security Compass. These are some resources which are ready-made available to you for your reference. Then comes the outcome of it, which typically security professionals have. So as a security professional, when I perform an audit of a cloud environment for a customer, obviously my audit would reflect the controls which are there in cloud security benchmarks, but my audit controls would not only come from cloud security benchmarks. They will be a combination of multiple, they will be a combination of benchmarks and controls from multiple sources. So the spreadsheet or the audit sheet that I have put together, it comprises of CIS benchmarks. It comprises of NIST cloud security benchmarks. It comprises of OWASP, top 10 application vulnerabilities, and then best practices around it, application security vulnerabilities. It comprises of SELS top 25 application security vulnerabilities. It comprises of Gartner's recommendation for cloud security. It also comprises of Cloud Security Alliance, Cloud Control Matrix, all latest version. And this also includes OEM recommendations, OEM, so which is basically in case of Microsoft, it is Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmarks. So it's a comprehensive checklist, comprehensive audit list that I have put together for all the three clouds, which is a combination of all of this. This is not exhaustive. It also includes some additional that I have learned over a period of time. So this is how I basically perform. So obviously I cannot provide you one single document that has everything, but yes, this is how it does. Make sense?
Yeah. So all these listed here are the built-in policies that we get in Azure, right?
Not exactly. Azure only provides you this Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmarks. However, the question is you can identify a mapping. So when you look at Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmarks, or what you can do when you look for any benchmark, you can create a mapping also that how it maps. For example, I'll show you if I have it ready-made. Yep, over here. So I'll show you one mapping sheet that will make sense to you. For example, this is the mapping, which is Microsoft Azure Security Benchmarks mapping with list controls. So you can see here's the CIS benchmarks. Here's the Azure Security Benchmarks. So you see the mapping between the benchmarks. So the question, see, it is all the effort that you invest, and it requires optimization, regular updates. So you create a batching, mapping first. Let's say you pick up the benchmarks. Now, at the end of the day, when it comes to cloud security, we all expect the same outcome, which is secure infrastructure. So which means that some of the controls which are there in these benchmarks are redundant. They are common. And if these controls are common, then how will you make sure that you are not doing redundant audit? You're not auditing the control again and again. That is where you go with the mapping part. So when you download Cloud Security Alliance Cloud Control Metrics, you will see that how it maps with other controls and other frameworks. Give me a moment. I will show you that. For example, this is the latest matrix, Cloud Control Matrix version 4 from Cloud Security Alliance. You will find that when you look at the control, you will also see the mapping of those controls with additional benchmarks. It also shows you mapping, wherein you can see here when you scroll it to the right, auditing guidelines. So this also contains the mapping of the controls. Over here, you can see mappings. So here you see the mapping, that how a specific control maps with controls of other benchmarks. So you can see, cloud security benchmarks control with 301. You can see the mapping with IFS control, with ISO, with the ISO 27001, with this cybersecurity framework, mapping with this cybersecurity framework version 1, mapping with PCI DSS, mapping with PCI DSS version 4. So that's where you see the mapping. So instead of doing this exercise, I would say you will need to obviously spend time and involve energy here, wherein you will create your own. Because when your employer goes to perform an audit for a customer, your employer cannot blindly use one benchmark or one checklist. Because if you do that, your customer may say that we could have done it by ourselves. What was the point of calling you as an expert? We need a comprehensive review. That is where you will create your own version of audit checklist that will have controls mentioned across domains, all domains of cybersecurity, all domains of cloud security, whichever is applicable to the customer. That's what you will do. And that will create a comprehensive checklist. For example, there is one from Microsoft that I can show you right now.
So Raghuveer, my question is, so we have to create the custom policies, right? Just to make sure we get all the aspects of different policies. So if Azure is giving a CIS benchmark policy built in, can we just pick and choose and then create our own custom policy from the existing policies? Is that how we do it?
No, not exactly. I will say Azure only provides OEM security best practices in the form of cloud security benchmarks. Its cloud security benchmarks doesn't have mapping with others. Mapping comes with Cloud Security Alliance because Cloud Security Alliance is cloud neutral. It's cloud neutral. It doesn't specifically talk about one cloud. It's cloud neutral. That is why CCM provides you the mapping. Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark will not provide you the mapping because these benchmarks are only meant for Microsoft Cloud. So what you can do, if you're doing the, if you're doing the assessment for Microsoft Cloud only, audit for Microsoft Cloud only, you can primarily use Microsoft Cloud Security benchmarks, and you can enhance your cloud security benchmarks by adding additional controls from rest of the benchmarks and controls. That's what you can do. If it is for Azure, let's say you're not doing it for Azure, you're doing it for multi-cloud, then this will be your starting point. This is how you can start with. You can start with Cloud Security Alliance CCM, and then you can add additional knowledge, or you can put additional, you can populate CCM with these benchmarks also. That's what you can do. So it depends on what you are going to do. And I'm just sharing my personal experience, but this is how I have done it. I continue to do it, and I've done it when I used to work for Big Fours or top ISVs of the world. Hope that answers the question.
Yes, yes, that's a very detailed answer. Thanks.
Great, let's move on. All right, so very important. Auditing and reporting is very important. Obviously, you will not learn it in a couple of hours or probably in a couple of days. This takes a lot of experience, and the more experience you have in this process, the more refined, effective audit outcome you will produce for your client. Then comes risk associated with cloud applications, which are common. It is not that cloud applications have some specific risk or special risk, or there are a separate team of hackers whose job is to exploit cloud applications, and there's a separate team for non-cloud applications. The risks are common, but some risks are more prevalent in cloud applications, which is risk related to access management. Because 90% of the security incidents were a result of misconfigured identity. So broken access control is very important for cloud applications. So let's look at those risks, which is first is data breaches, breach of data. This is very common in cloud applications. And why this breach of data is common? Because customer doesn't understand the shared security responsibility model. When it comes to on-premises, you know it from day one that it is your end-to-end responsibility, and you will do everything possible to secure your business interest, which includes data, application, assets, everything. But the moment you go into the cloud, you feel as if you have offloaded your responsibility to cloud service provider. They will be taking care of it. However, your deployment model is IaaS, wherein cloud service provider doesn't take any responsibility. So shared security responsibility model is very important. And that is where I have almost spent an hour discussing the same in my Microsoft Sentinel training, the first video, which says Microsoft Security Fundamentals. I've spent detailed, in-depth explanation that why it is so important, because when I do the assessment, when I do the audit, I really feel bad when I speak to the security professionals, my counterpart at customer side, and when I come to know that they don't have good understanding of shared responsibility model. And that's where the data breaches are happening, because they really do not know whether they need to do it or their OEM is currently doing it. So data breaches, very important. You need to mitigate the risk of data breaches by implementing robust security measures and monitoring systems to detect and respond to potential breaches. Insecure access point. This is also another important threat in cloud security when you don't understand the access point. For example, there are services in Azure like storage accounts, Azure PaaS, Azure App Services, Azure SQL PaaS. They have public endpoints. If you really don't want those services to be accessible over the public internet, you should use a private endpoint, you should use a service endpoint and disable their public endpoint and have them configured with a private IP, which is coming from the virtual network that you have, so that the service resides in your network and is not accessible outside of your virtual network. So this is very important, unauthorized entry and access point in your cloud. Now, the security tool that can help you with this is CASB solution, or the one that you have, which is Zscaler Internet Access Solution. Those solutions can actually help you to identify, manage, control, and prohibit unauthorized entry and exit point in your cloud environment. Notification and alert, very important. When it comes to security, there are two approaches to it. Security approaches. The first is proactive, and the second is reactive. These are the two approaches. There is nothing that comes into between. There is nothing which is above and beyond, left and right. Proactive and reactive. We should have proactive as well as reactive security controls in place. When I say proactive security controls, we should have solutions like EDR, endpoint detection and response. We should have solutions like CASB solutions. We should have solutions like CSPM solutions. We should have CWPP solutions. We should have solutions like SESI. We should have solutions like Cloud Native Application Protection Platform. This is your proactive solutions, proactive security controls, because they proactively tell you whenever there are any, whenever you have any indicator of compromise, indicator of attack, or indicator of misconfiguration in your environment. I'm sure most of you said Microsoft Defender for Cloud yesterday while introducing yourself. So I'm sure you're aware of these terminologies, what these terminologies mean. So these are your proactive security solutions or proactive security approaches that you can deploy in your environment, depending on the size, scale, and complexity. Then comes reactive. Reactive basically means you should have solutions like SIEM/SOAR. You should have solutions like, I would say, you should have regular audits in place. That's your reactive strategy. So SIEM/SOAR solutions, they basically work on the basis of logs. Logs means a digital forensic, somebody, an activity, an action that already happened in the past. So they read and analyze the logs and they provide you some information. They provide you some input in terms of something which is not working as expected, something which may have been compromised, something which has a probability to get compromised, and regular audit. Even though you have these solutions in place, nobody can replace regular audit, and this audit should be both internal as well as external. You should not just depend on your employees and their capabilities to have an internal audit. Always call for external audit always. That is why in software development, you have a software programmer. Then there is another person who is known as QA, quality analyst, or software testing professional. So you cannot test your own code. Similarly, when you perform an internal audit, there is a high probability that you will be biased, or you will kind of override, or you will overlook your own security controls.
Yes.
So that's what you need to make sure that you will go with proactive and reactive security strategy, which includes all of these solutions and some additional solutions. I'm saying even before proactive security strategy, there comes the landing zone that you need to build before you even start to migrate or build from scratch the very first application. After the landing zone is built, then you basically host, I'm saying either migrate or build from scratch, build and deploy from scratch the production applications or workloads. So once you have all of this in place, then comes the question of making sure that you are performing a proactive as well as reactive security strategy in place. Any questions so far? Any question, guys, so far?
No.
Did you? Okay, I'm back. Am I audible, guys?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, let's move on. So next is application level security threats. Now, when it comes to application level security threats, these are some threats. Obviously, you will see a reflection of since 25 top 25 application security vulnerabilities. You will see a reflection of OWASP top 10 application security vulnerabilities here also, but these are the one that I have actually built together, wherein I basically explain it to my customers or to my students, because I don't want to be biased by just referring to one expert or or one one expert or one website or one institution that is heavily invested into cloud security or application security. So my first is insufficient monitoring. Now, insufficient monitoring basically means that you have deployed the application, you have built a landing zone. However, you're not monitoring the application properly. Your application performance monitoring is insufficient. It doesn't contain all the matrices or all the parameters that needs to go into the monitoring. This insufficient monitoring, do not only consider it from performance and availability perspective. This is equally applicable from security perspective, that you're not using the security SIM solutions. If you're using SIM solutions, you've not configured it to its fullest capability. Now, most of you, when I discussed yesterday, you said Sentinel. The question is the Sentinel configured to its most capability, to its utmost capability? That's the question. And when I perform an audit, this is what I would like to see, that all the analytics rules that you have created, the default as well as custom analytics rule, all the use cases that you have created automation against, or you have created a logic app for it, how are you, what is your design and architecture aspects of log analytics workspace? Does it comply with data protection and privacy regulations and standards? Are you using log sources from multiple Azure accounts, multiple subscriptions, multiple Entra ID tenants? Does your log sources involve systems which are outside of Azure? If yes, then where are they? Are they on premises? Are they in cloud? So there is a comprehensive checklist that I have put together, using which I actually monitor or audit a SIEM implementation, which includes Microsoft Sentinel also. And basis on the outcome of that checklist, I'm able to tell you whether your solution is up to date, whether it has some scope of improvement. If that scope is substantial or significant, that's what monitoring is all about. So insufficient monitoring is one security threat that you need to look forward to. Free and secret access. Now, this is another threat that comes when you build the application. When the application is built, and if you don't follow DevSecOps process, you typically perform SEST and DEST in the application, in the application development lifecycle. So sometimes what happens, you basically embed the authentication into the application code itself. I have seen during audit that a lot of application, they have in their web config or INF file credentials available for databases or for application servers. They put credentials in plain text. Ideally, the credentials should not be there. There has to be a reference to a credential management solution like Vault, eVault, KMS service, or any service where you can manage your secrets and credentials, so that the application will communicate with that service and get the credentials to access the application or database tier. But what actually happens in reality, you will be surprised to see the web config file. In the connection string, you will have database credentials embedded, username and password for the database that happens to have system admin credentials. So that's free and secret access. Vulnerability management, very important. Your application, your strategy could be foolproof today. It will not remain the same tomorrow and day after, probably a week from now or a month from now. IT changes very rapidly. New security threats are getting introduced. Hackers have gone to the next level. They have gone very advanced. They will find a way to break into the security of your system. So you need to make sure that you have a comprehensive vulnerability management solution in place that will be able to identify, prioritize, and remediate security vulnerabilities in cloud applications. Service disruption and data loss. Another thing. Now, when it comes to risk associated to an application, it is not always data leak. It is not always the security incidents are not always targeted towards data leak. They are sometimes targeted towards interrupting your business, disrupting your services. So what if, let's say there are two companies, Amazon and Flipkart. Now both Amazon and Flipkart, they are running their campaigns. Amazon is running Great India Festival and Flipkart is running Big Billion Days. They typically have these campaigns together because they want to get more business. What if Amazon is able to disrupt the services of Flipkart by hiring a hacker? Or what if the services of Flipkart are disrupted while that campaign is running? Customers will directly move to Amazon and Amazon will be able to capitalize on that service disruption. So the hackers or malified or these rogues, they do not always want to steal or make money. Sometimes they just disrupt your services or they are paid for service disruption. So this can directly impact your business operations and lead to productivity losses. Data loss, you understand what data loss is, wherein your organization is susceptible to data loss, which can have severe consequences of confidentiality and integrity of their data. Now, yesterday, yesterday, look at the behavior of Microsoft Azure. What is happening? You are able to log into Azure portal using your corporate credentials, your corporate email address, but you're not able to log into Azure portal using your personal email account. The Azure portal remains the same, but the difference lies in the credentials. Why is this behavior? The reason of this behavior is protect from data loss. Your laptop contains classified data that belongs to the project or business unit of your employer. If you are logging into Microsoft Azure using corporate credentials, even if you upload that data into cloud, it will still remain within your employer's control because Azure belongs to them and they have security controls configured in Azure. What if you are able to log in to your own Azure subscription using your own account? That account belongs to you, which is outside of the control of your employer. And then you can create a storage account and upload confidential data into it. Your DLP solution will not raise a security incident here because DLP solution is configured to exempt any upload to a cloud service provider. That is where they have another layer of protection, who that cloud service provider is and what credentials is related to that cloud service provider is configured there. That is also known as conditional access, and that is configured through the Cloud Access Security Broker service, which is being provided by Zscaler Internet Access. So data loss, very important. Increased malware infections. This is another risk to organizations, wherein sometimes you use unauthorized cloud services or you typically browse URLs which are reported to have containing malwares, and that is where it gets into your network. It spreads across your network, and by the time your Siemens source solution or your EDR solution is made aware of it, the damage has already been done. So that's another risk to cloud applications. Other is misconfiguration and insecure interfaces, which is sometimes your applications have misconfigurations. They are using public libraries. I'm saying what is happening these days, we are becoming so dependent on AI, or I would say on Google Cloud, that we don't actually write anything on our own. We typically take references from internet. So if you want to build a program, you will typically search it on Google. You will look it on GitHub and find if there is any repository, any references available. And you will probably get the program code also. but you don't really validate the code. And what happens sometimes, the code that you download from internet, it has vulnerabilities. It basically has references to open libraries because of which your applications are misconfigured. And those misconfigurations can easily be exploited. So you have solutions like Acunetics, Aquasec, which can help your applications to scan for code related vulnerabilities, and they can actually help you secure your applications. Insecure interfaces, which is another aspect of risk to a cloud applications. So your interfaces should be secure, which means the entry and exit point for your applications should be configured. They should have restriction based on IP address. They should have restriction based on uh, based on signals, which are device type, IP address, uh, identity type, the location. These are the things that you should have. In Azure, the service that can help you secure interfaces is known as conditional access, which is part of Microsoft Entra ID. Then comes compliance issues. You will also have compliance issues in cloud, wherein you have applications which exhibit a certain properties, and those properties needs have compliances, but you're not configuring the compliances. And if there are compliance issues, trust me, that is the worst that can happen to a business, because compliance issues sometimes results in sanction, it results in severe penalties, and sometimes they will, or the business will be forced to close operations in that geography. So compliance issues are really risky and they should be avoided with utmost priority. Then comes another risk, which is human error and account hijacking. Human error, it is known as insider attack. Sometimes the human error, which is intentional or could be unintentional, that can also misconfigure the application, which may result in mishandling of data that leads to security incidents. So this happens a lot, human error. I will say uh, you can probably end up provisioning a virtual machine with public IP. What if you don't have a policy in place that prohibits this action? Then your machine will be accessible to the domain. Account hijacking, which is another risk to cloud applications. Uh, wherein the identities gets compromised and unauthorized individuals gain access to your application, your cloud accounts, and they can potentially lead to data breaches, or they can also corrupt or delete your data. Data breaches, which is another risk for cloud applications, which directly involves damage to organizations' reputation, loss of productivity, loss of revenue also. So that's equally, that is a risk which is there. So these are the risk associated with cloud applications that you need to be aware of. I'm open to questions, guys, if you have any with respect to this. Any question, guys?
No, as such.
Okay, let's move on. Guys, theory is equally important. Unless you understand the theoretical aspects of it, you will not be able to configure the solution unless you know what you need to protect, irrespective of the solution that you have in hand, whether it's Defender, whether it is a third-party solution. Unless you know what you need to protect, the solution is of no use. So it is very important that you understand the security aspects, the risk, because that will define what you actually need to protect. Okay. The next is OWASP top 10 application security vulnerabilities. So what you need to do, I'll directly explain them from the website. So you need to type OWASP top 10. And OWASP top 10 provides you application security vulnerabilities here. These are the top 10 security vulnerabilities. You've already seen some of them in my presentation, but let's talk about it. So basically, what is OWASP? OWASP is a non-profit org which is invested into application security. So it's a non-profit body which comprises of experts who basically analyze, surveys, performs audit, consolidate their knowledge, and they basically provide an outcome in the form of top 10 application security vulnerabilities. And they say that when you are building and deploying applications in cloud, please make sure that you are aware of these vulnerabilities, that you make sure that these vulnerabilities do not exist in your.
Hello, Raghuveer.
Yeah. Yes.
No, your voice was.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes, yes. You are audible.
Okay, great. So when it comes to top 10 application security vulnerabilities, they first released in 2017. And when they released this top 10 application security vulnerabilities, they basically provided these vulnerabilities, in the order. The one that you see on the top is something which is highly, which is a high vulnerability or high importance vulnerability. The one you find at the bottom is the least important or least critical vulnerability. However, what has happened from 2017 till 2021, or with the expansion of security vulnerabilities or security incidents or information technology, OWASP realized that their top 10 application security vulnerabilities and their rating is not sufficient. There has been an addition of a lot of new vulnerabilities. With the advancement in technology, there has been new security incidents which have new features or new capabilities or new methods. So what they did, they revised it in 2021, and now they will need to revise it once again, because these vulnerabilities, there are some additional vulnerabilities that I see today, vulnerabilities which are getting caused by AI, cybersecurity or AI, the artificial intelligence, which most of the ISPs are heavily investing in. So now most of the solutions that you get, it says that it has AI ML driven intelligence. Now, if it is AI ML driven, then you also need to look into the flip side of it, that AI cannot replace a human. And if AI is driving the intelligence, then there could be something that it will either overlook or it will unnecessarily block. And that is where in EDR solutions today, you need to exclude certain files because AI doesn't understand whether those files are related to the business or those files are actually a malware. So let's talk about the vulnerabilities as they are. You can see the top vulnerability is broken access control, which is directly related to misconfigured identities or identity misconfiguration. Then comes the another vulnerability, which is cryptographic failure, which is directly related to the failure of encryption methodology that you have used in your application. Probably the encryption method is not, up to the mark. Probably the encryption strength that you are using is not sufficient, or the encryption method, which is symmetric or asymmetric, is not configured properly, or the encryption keys are not rotated on time, or the encryption, or the encryption tool that you are using is not up to date. So that's cryptographic failure. Then comes injection, which is SQL injection, which is a layer 7 vulnerability that you find in applications. Insecure design, which directly relates to the design principle. Your application was designed insecurely, which means application has a lot of vulnerabilities into the code. The design principles were not followed. Security misconfigurations. It is directly related to insecure design. Because of this insecure design, it has a lot of security misconfiguration and it has a vulnerable and outdated components. Then identification and authentication failure. A lot of authentication failures are happening in your application, And these failures basically lead to broken access control. Software and data integrity failures. Your application is actually using third-party solutions, and those failures are there. Then security logging and monitoring failures, which basically means that your existing security logging and monitoring strategy is incompetent. You are either not using the up-to-date solution, or the solution is advanced, but you've not configured it to its fullest capability. Then server-side request forgery, which is another type of attack or the vulnerability that happens on the application. So if you want to understand them in detail, you just need to click on you need to click on those vulnerabilities, and then it will show you the factors for that vulnerabilities, that common vulnerability exploits that are mapped to this vulnerability is this, max incidence rate is this. So you get some, data, some numbers, but that is not important. Important is to understand what that vulnerability is. So it says broken access control. Now, what is broken access control? It says access control enforce policies such as users can't act outside of their intended permissions, which is authentication and authorization. However, failure will basically lead to unauthorized information disclosure, which basically means a normal user can gain administrative access, and by virtue of it, he or she will have access to unauthorized access to information which he or she is not authorized to. Or modification. They will modify access, they will destroy the data, or they will perform a business function which is outside of their user limits. The common access control vulnerabilities, these are the vulnerabilities which typically happens in access control, which is violation of principle of least privilege or deny by default, bypassing access control checks by modifying the URL, permitting viewing or editing someone else's account, accessing API within missing access control, elevation of privileges or acting as a user without being logged in or acting as an admin, force browsing to authenticate pages as an unauthenticated user. So these are my examples of broken access control. And how do you prevent? So it says the prevention. Now, prevention is secondary unless you understand the possibilities that may exist when it comes to a vulnerability, or that may exist when it comes to a specific misconfigured control. This prevention is not used. If you don't know what is failing, how will you prevent it? So first, this is very important. Then comes how do you prevent? So for example, it says except for public resources, deny by default, which is not what Azure is. Azure follows the principle of allow by default. So in Azure, you need to spend more time and effort to protect it. AWS is denied by default. It doesn't allow anything. That is where AWS becomes a complex cloud. You will need to have good knowledge of security to understand, manage, and maintain AWS cloud resources. Azure is simple. Implement access control mechanism. Model access control should enforce ownership, and that's exactly what we are going to do tomorrow. Tomorrow, our focus is going to be on identity and access management service, and we will see how in Azure, in Microsoft Azure, we can use access control, or how in Azure we can use Microsoft Entra ID, which is the default directory service in Azure, to actually put together security controls to prevent or to avoid broken access control vulnerability. So that's what we need to do. Logging we need to do, session identifiers. That's what this is the attack scenario. They're giving a scenario where you can see that the application uses unverified data in SQL call that is accessing account information. So you can see it is basically accessing the account information. This is unverified. It says an attacker simply modifies the browser account parameters to send whatever account number they want. So what hacker is doing here, because your application is misconfigured, hacker will replace this account with not my account. I would say they're just saying not my account, but hacker will actually put a legitimate account name here to seek information about that account. That's the one example. The other example is the vulnerability related to the URLs. So sometimes what happens when we configure an application like WordPress or any third party content management solution, they typically have the admin URL configured as your domain name oblique admin. So this is what is happening here. This is the example that your app says example.com, and then hacker will try to append this string and try to see if hacker can get into the login credentials. It can get into the login page, and then hacker will trigger a brute force attack to to send multiple combinations of user ID and password to gain access to the admin panel of your website. So it says if an unauthenticated user can access either pages, it's a flaw. If not, if a non-admin can access the admin page, this is a flaw. This is known as broken access control. That you should not have your admin page designed like this, because these are common examples, common scenarios. So this is about the first vulnerability, which is broken access control. Similarly, you have all the vulnerabilities. This is more related to an application. So some of the vulnerabilities you may not understand in the first attempt because you probably do not come from application security background, or you do not come from application development background, wherein you probably may not understand this vulnerability in the first attempt, which is server-side request forgery. But these are the vulnerabilities. So what I want you to do, guys, here, I want you to spend 10 minutes, 1 minute for each vulnerability, read it and see if you have any questions. And then we will move on to the next topic. So take 10 minutes, read about the vulnerabilities and see if you have any questions. We can discuss it, and that will help other participants also, because they may have the same question, but they sometimes do not ask. So take 10 minutes, read about it, and let me know if you have any questions. I'm sitting right here. Thank you. Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when it comes to Microsoft Azure, the service that we primarily use for managing identities is known as Microsoft Entra ID. This is the service. This service used to be known as Azure Active Directory. Microsoft last year itself changed its name from Azure Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID. Now you will still find some references of Azure Active Directory in Microsoft Azure portal across a couple of services. You will still find reference of Azure Active Directory in Microsoft documentation at some places. But very soon, probably in next couple of months, Azure Active Directory will not be visible anywhere. It will be Microsoft Entra ID. Why Microsoft changed it? The reason why Microsoft changed it, because when it says Azure Active Directory, it gives a perception to end users that this directory is only for Azure. But when Microsoft changed it to Microsoft Entra ID, Microsoft is giving a message to users, to customers, that our directory service is not only meant for Azure, it is equally applicable for other products of Microsoft, which include SharePoint Online, which includes Microsoft Dynamics, which includes Microsoft 365, which includes Microsoft Security, that includes Microsoft Defender. It is a common directory service for all Microsoft products. One. Second, this directory service can be used as a directory service for any other application which sits outside of Azure. So you can also onboard your enterprise applications and have them authenticate using Microsoft Entra ID. This is the message that Microsoft wanted to pass on, and that is why Microsoft changed the name of the service from Azure Active Directory to Microsoft Entra ID. Are you with me on this?
Yes.
Okay, great. Next thing. So this is about Microsoft Entra ID. Now let's go back to the documentation and let's understand some fundamental principles around identity and access management. So when it comes to identity and access management, first of all, let's try and understand it. I know some participants are quite good in identity and access management, but I need each one of you to be on the same page. And hence I will spend next couple of minutes talking about the fundamentals of it. And that will probably give you an opportunity to bridge the gap that you may have in your knowledge with respect to identity and access management. So identity and access management, in short, is known as IAM. This is what it is known as in short. And identity and access management is basically made of two terminologies. One is identity and the second is access management. The best way to understand the technology when it looks complex is to break it down and try to understand it in pieces in smaller portion and then probably consolidate it, put it together. That is the right approach of learning something. So identity and access management can be broken into two parts, which is identity and access management. Now the question is, what is an identity? Can somebody describe what is an identity? What is an identity, guys?
Who wants it?
The roles which can be given to a user or
So where is an identity here? Is user the identity or role the identity?
user.
User is the identity. Great.
Right.
Any other participant who can explain what is an identity?
User and as well as the devices also called as identity. I means we can give the who which one we can control which one to access which one, how where to access, like that. We can control the whole thing through identity access management.
Great, Srinath. That's the right approach. So let's understand, guys. When it comes to identities, identities are of two types, basically. So you have a human identity and you have non-human identity. Human identity basically means your user, your employees, your vendors, your partners. They are human identities and etc. Human identities. Then comes non-human identities. The example of your non-human identity is devices. Devices are your laptops, your desktops, servers, your mobile devices, mobile phones, PDA, iPad, and service accounts, managed identities. These are non-human identities. So this is identity and access. These are identities basically. So it could be an end user. It could be your customer also. I'm saying, what if you grant customers access to your system? Then your customer is also a user. Customer is definitely not an employee, but a user. So user, customer, employees, vendors, partners, they all are human identities. Non-human identities, your devices, which includes your laptop, desktop, servers, mobile phone, PDAs, iPad, service accounts, they all are non-human identities. Are you with me on this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. What is access management here? As it says management, so access management is the process or methodology of granting access to identities. This is the process and methodology of granting access to identities. Now, what are you granting access to? So obviously access to identities, granting access on what? Systems and resources. So you're granting access to identities on systems and resources. And this access that you are granting, this access has some characteristics. What are those characteristics of the access that you need to understand is the access management part of identity and access management. So when you grant access to an identity, the access has to be time bound. When I say time bound, it basically means that you are not granting forever access. It should not be forever access. It should be time bound, which basically means that you can grant a limited access or a time bound access to an identity. Time bound. Second, the access should follow the least privilege. It should be least privilege access, which basically means instead of granting administrative access to an identity, you can provide a least privilege access, which is more than sufficient for that identity to deliver its job role and function. So least privilege access, which is least access, or you can say lowest privileges possible to deliver job roles and functions. That's the another thing. So these are the characteristics of access management or how access management should happen. So lowest privileges that you will provide to an identity. Next, what are the next? I'm saying what are the next characteristics of access management? So it has to be time bound. It has to be least privilege. What else? What comes to your mind, guys, but when it comes to access management? Next is
Controlling the
it should
privileges.
be specific.
separation of duty, which is very important. The access should be granted. Access must be granted based on the duty of the identity. Whatever role they have in the system based on the job role and function, lowest privilege. So least privilege principle and separation of duty, they are basically used together, these concepts. So separation of duty, time bound access. What else that comes to your mind when it comes to access management?
Access should be limited to the devices, or suppose
Limited.
limited to the devices which the user needs to work on.
Okay. Limited to the devices, you mean to say if the user needs access to a specific server, user should only get access to that server.
That's right. So specific, yeah.
That comes here. Privileged access management.
Oh, okay.
So you can use a solution, whether native or third party. You have solutions in Azure. You have third-party solutions like CyberArk, ForgeRock. You can use privileged access management solutions. In privileged access management solutions, you can define which user will have what level of access on which system for how many hours or how many days or how many months. That's privileged access management. The other is PIM. Now these both terms are used interchangeably, which is privileged identity management. Can somebody explain the difference between privileged access management and privileged identity management?
Privilege identity management means it should be given to the administrator, means elevated access, like they have higher level of permissions to control over the Azure, means cloud operations, and if it is a server, like enterprise admins, application administrator, these are all called privilege identity. And if it is a PAM means we can give the permission within a time bound and we can monitor it for auditing purpose, everything. Based on we can limited the users.
Okay. Any other participant?
I think PAM is more like an authentication where PIM is authorization. PIM decides what roles for how long and who approves those roles, and all that is usually the roles management activity.
Okay. Can you give me a business use case or a specific example where we use a combination of PIM and PAM?
Right. So a PAM is you have different set of users. They are authorized to do different activities, but their access should be secured. Like they should not directly access the servers, but it should be moderated through some software, right? The way we use PAM is where your access is video recorded, the logs are also recorded, and whatever activities you are doing is also monitored, the commands that you are executing. Whereas PIM is segregation of duties, like um, read-only accesses, then privilege accesses, and who has that access for how long, then regular access reviews. Do you really want to continue that access periodically or not? So that is more like the marriage between access, the roles and the identities. The PAM is the way you access.
Great. All right. So let's talk about a problem statement. Let's say you're part of an operations team and your company has a, I'd say you're part of operations, cloud operations team, wherein you manage cloud services for your customers. That involves provisioning of services, that involves uh, configuration, modification of services. And when those services are not needed, it also involves deleting those services, deprovisioning the services. That's what you typically do. So you got a service request. There's a service request from an application owner. You can say from an application, or let's say there's a service request from an application or VM owner, and the service request says, kindly add an additional disk of 100 GB to an Azure VM. And they provide you the VM name. The VM name is US East Broad DB DB SQL DB 01. That's the VM name. I'm just using the nomenclature that we use in production for naming virtual machines name. So that's the service request, which says kindly add an additional disk of 100 GB to an Azure VM. This is the VM name actually. Now you are the team member. You get this request. This request involves both PIM and PAM. Who can explain where exactly PIM comes and where exactly PAM comes? And how do you use a combination of PIM and PAM to service this request? This is exactly what you're going to do tomorrow.
PIM is basically commanded to get a access to that particular server. Means if you need to give a 100 GB extra storage, means you should be a storage admin or cloud admin. We need that role, AD role. For providing that 100 GB, we need to log in through PAM, CyberArk, to auditing purpose and monitoring purpose.
Okay, but let's not get into the third party. Let's stick to Microsoft. Let's stick to Microsoft only. Where is PIM and PAM in Microsoft here? Okay, so there are two aspects here. First of all, let's understand. Once again, I said, so you're almost there. You actually spoke it correct, but let's just understand for the sake of other person. So this request says, kindly add an additional disk of 100 GB to an Azure VM. Now, if you have ever worked on such request, this request comprises of two steps. So there are two steps here. The step number 1 is navigate to the VM. Then you can click on disk. Then you can click on add disk, or I can show you from the portal. So this is how you do it. You basically navigate to the VM where you need to attach the disk. You will select the VM. You will click on the disk tab here for the VM, probably under operations. The Azure has actually, okay, over here under settings. You will click on disk here. And then there is an option that says create and attach a new disk, attach existing disk. Now the user is asking you to attach a new 100 GB disk. So you will click on create and attach a new disk. And here you will select the disk name. You will say this is my data disk 01. You will select the storage type, which is locally redundant storage. Then you will select the size of the disk, 100 GB, and you will say, after you select all of this, you will basically go here, add it. Okay, so you will directly say apply. Now what it will do, it will create 100 GB of disk and it will attach that disk to the VM. That's what this is going to do. Now this process basically involves some level of access. So disk, create, add disk. This is first. This process basically requires some level of access, which is known as RBAC in Azure. So I actually need access. Now I can either have a privileged access, which is known as contributor. With contributor access, I can perform this activity, or I will need a fine-grained RBAC, which is I need admin access. So I need storage admin and I also need VM admin. Right? So I'm just hypothetically typing the level of access, but you specifically need what level of access is needed. For that, you will need to navigate. You will need to duplicate this tab so that this activity is not affected. You will basically
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah, looks like Raghuveer is disconnected.
Yes.
Okay, I'm back. Guys, I didn't realize when did I get disconnected from Microsoft Teams. But what was the last thing that you heard from me?
When you were opening the second browser instance for us.
Okay, so you lost all of this, right? Great,
Yeah.
no problem. You know, if I get disconnected from Microsoft Teams, and I'll just fix this today. I will say this laptop is actually running short on virtual memory. I'll fix it in the evening today. Okay, so I was talking about this request, which is kindly add an additional disk of 100 GB to an Azure VM. And with this request, I actually intended to show you the PIM and PAM capability, which is there in Microsoft Azure. Now, this activity comprises of two steps, which is navigate to the VM, navigate to the disk, and then create and add disk. So I'll show you once again. So I actually navigate to that VM, which is this VM. Let's say our jump host VM. And on that VM under settings, I see disk option. I'll navigate to the disk. And here I click on create and add a new disk. This is first portion of this activity, that which I already did. So I create and add a new disk. This activity actually requires some level of access on Microsoft Azure because I'm using an identity. This is my identity. My identity will need some level of access to perform this activity. Now, what is this activity? This activity is making a configuration change to a VM. The VM contains one OS disk. You're adding one more disk. So you are changing the configuration of the VM, which means you need a role on the VM. Second, you are provisioning a storage service, which is managed disk. So you need a disk related role also. Now these roles will be provided to your identity by your admin, probably your lead, or by your Azure admin, or by your security team. So they will provide you certain roles actually. Now those roles could be these roles, which is, let's say, storage admin, VM admin, or contributor. So you will be provided certain roles. This is known as privileged identity management. Why this is privileged identity management? Because let's say Devraj is doing it. Now Devraj, this identity, so Devraj is a normal user, which means the current level of access that Devraj has is reader. Devraj has reader access in Azure subscription. So if you navigate to subscriptions, here you navigate to the subscription name, then you navigate to identity and access management. You click on roles, and here you will see the roles like reader. So by default, all identities that you have in your Azure subscription, they have reader role, and with reader role, they can view all resources, but they are not allowed to make any changes, configuration changes to any resource. This is the current level of configuration, which is there with all the which is there with reader role. So all the users that you have in your operations team, by default, they are normal users. Whenever a service request comes that needs administrative privileges, the normal user will basically navigate to PIM service, where normal user will be able to see what all roles and capabilities are granted to the user. And accordingly, normal user will elevate the access, or will create an elevation request that either gets approved automatically, or an approval gets triggered to the approver who will approve the request. And after this elevation is complete, normal user will basically gain admin access for a defined period, a period which was defined by the admin, defined period or time frame. The normal user will get that access. So this portion is PIM part, privileged identity management, wherein you are managing identities which have privileged access. Then comes the PAM part. PAM part basically means that after this activity is complete, after you have added the disk on the virtual machine, the disk will not be accessible on the virtual machine in the first attempt. So for example, you can see the virtual machine has a disk, which is a data disk. This is the data disk. Now I will log into the virtual machine. So in order to log into the virtual machine, RDP into the virtual machine, I need privileged access once again. See, I can log into this virtual machine. I have got the IP of the virtual machine. I will just type MSTSC over here. I'll type the IP address. Then it will ask me for credentials. Now, let's say I log in with this user. This is my username. So I will just type the credentials here. And I'm logging in with that user account. Okay, so I'm logged in. Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, after logging in, since I'm a Windows admin, I actually know how to perform this activity. I'll directly go to disk management. Disk management is the place where I will need to navigate to. Okay. This unnecessarily opened. So let me show you the 100 GB of disk that I have attached, that is shown in Azure portal as attached to this VM. On this VM, I can see there are two disks. One is OS disk, which is by default 127 GB. Then there is another data disk, which is of 100 GB. In the portal, I see the disk attached. However, when I navigate to the VM, inside the VM, I don't see the disk here. It is not available. So I will need to perform some additional activities, which basically means on this VM, I will need to basically navigate to disk management, diskmanagement.msc console, and this is where I have a roadblock. It says you do not have access to logical disk manager on this VM. Let's get back to the documentation. RDP into the VM, navigate to disk management, initialize and format the disk, and this requires local admin access. This is the level of access which is actually needed that I don't have. And that is where PAM comes into the picture, privileged access management. So with privileged access management in place, my identity will be granted local admin access on the VM. Now, there are multiple ways of achieving it. Either in a production environment, sometimes we use a local admin, a generic local admin account, or we use solutions like CyberArk, wherein we onboard all the systems, all the virtual machines, and then we create user accounts in CyberArk, and we define what level of access this user will have on various systems. And then what user will do, user will basically navigate to CyberArk. In the CyberArk, user will navigate to that VM, will double click on that VM to take remote of it or SSH it to it. Now, since CyberArk is a third-party solution, it has the capability to create screenshots, create a session recording, and also create a log of what that user is doing in that remote access session. So that's what you will do. So that is where PAM comes into the picture. You will either provide local admin access to the user or you will use CyberArk. Now, what I will do, let's say I don't have CyberArk. So I will probably, my admin will probably provide me local admin access, or my admin already has a local admin credentials available that is shared with the, those credentials are basically shared with the operations team. So the operations team people will basically use those credentials to connect to the VM. So I'm using the credentials now. Instead of using this user credential, I'll use the admin credentials, which is Azure user. So I'm using the local admin credentials here. Now I'm logging into the VM as local admin. And if this VM is part of a domain, then I can also log into this VM as domain admin. After I logged into the VM, I will do the same thing. I'll navigate to disk management. And in disk management, I will be able to see that there is a disk which needs initialization. I will click OK. And then I will be able to see that 100 GB of disk, which says unallocated. I will just need to right click on it, create a simple volume from it. Just click on next. You can change the drive letter if you wish. You can put a volume name also. Click next, finish. Now this will format the disk. Now the disk is available on the VM. So if I go back to the this PC, I will see the disk is now available, which is 100 GB of disk that I can 100 GB of volume that my application or VM owner can use. So this completes my PAM part. I'm saying this completes my requesting actually. But where exactly is the security? Security is in the PIM PAM. So PIM is a service or is a process that we use to allow a regular user to elevate the privilege, get a privileged role to perform some privileged activity on Azure services. That's PIM. When it comes to the PAM, we basically grant admin access or admin capability to the identity so that the user can actually perform the admin access. And in Azure, there is a third thing which you should be aware of, which is just-in-time access. This also goes along with PIM and PAM, which is a capability which is part of Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and it comes under Cloud Workload Protection Platform. So all virtual machines in Azure, they are added or they are onboarded to Microsoft Defender for Cloud. And inside Defender for Cloud under Workload Protection Platform, you will see an option that says just-in-time access. And when you configure that option, you will be able to define the ports and the duration for access to a VM. So with the combination of these three services, you can provide a comprehensive security experience from identity and access management perspective in your environment to your end users or to your clients and customers. Did that make sense to all of you?
Yeah, Raghu. Just few questions for clarifications if
Sure.
Anybody else. Yeah. So I think you clarified a very complex myth that at least I had about PIM and PAM earlier, right? So PIM is roles management for doing activities on Azure portal, right? Or maybe on your Active Directory, right? That is where PIM is. Whereas PAM is on the target resource where you're going to perform the activities on that target resource, what roles you would require, right? So PAM is that part, right?
Absolutely. That's the reason I took this example so that you understand both the things in one way. Because what I have seen in most of the organizations, administrators or security team personnel, they don't have clear identification between PIM and PAM. They think that PIM and PAM are the same thing, but it is not same, it is different. And that's the reason I take this example so that you understand where exactly PIM comes into the picture and where exactly PAM comes into the picture. Now, tomorrow, we will configure PIM service in Microsoft Entra ID ourselves. We will create a couple of identities in Entra, couple of users in Entra. Then we will configure PIM access for those users. After that, we will imitate the same service request and have those users perform or uh, try to work on the service request. And then you will see that how it happens. And that's where I said that let's take an example that Dave is one of the user who is typically a normal user who maintains reader level of access all the time. But when that request is assigned to Dave, Dave will navigate to the PIM service, identify all the eligible roles that has been granted to him by the admin, will click on one of the role and elevate the access. After the access is elevated, they will get one of these roles which is needed to perform this activity for a limited period of time, which is, let's say, 3 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours. 8 hours is the maximum time that we do. I'm saying when I provide consulting or when I perform an audit of PIM services, if the customer is configured more than 8 hours, I give them a 0. I give them a red flag because no employee is working more than 8 hours in a shift. And why would you have an employee, an identity with privileged access when that identity is not there in office? So 8 hours is the maximum time frame. Now, depending on the role that I'm giving, so this is probably service level role. What if I'm giving contributor role to the subscription? Then I will not even have it for 8 hours. I will probably have it for 1 hour, 2 hours. So every 2 hours, the identity has to elevate the access so that there is a log of each activity which is getting done. So that's PAM, and then just in time, which is very important, which is unique to Azure. You don't have this feature in AWS and GCP, which adds additional layer of security to this approach. Because without just in time access, this PAM part will not work. The identity will be able to perform activities in Azure, but when it comes to completing the second step, the identity needs access to the VM. Now you can grant admin access to the identity, but unless just-in-time access is configured right, the identity will not be able to access the VM because just-in-time will basically block access at the port level. So 3389 port will be blocked for any activity. And unless 3389 is enabled, you will not be able to RDP into the VM. So this is a comprehensive configuration of IAM in Microsoft Azure that you can think of. And if you find it missing in your environment, this is where you can think about implementing it. OK, you don't need CyberArk at all. CyberArk is unless you have budget, unless your client has budget, you should not suggest any third-party solution to your client. Try and stick to this. Now, the question is, you will say, what if I need a solution to perform access management? I'm saying, what if I need a solution to perform session recording, or I want to create a log of what all activities are being performed? There is a solution which is Bastion Host in Azure. You can use a solution Bastion Host that has the capability to provide the same admin capabilities. It can perform, it can take screenshots. It also has capability to enable the session recording. You can use this capability. It's a native capability in Azure instead of using CyberArk. Now, I do not say that CyberArk, Bastion Host is equivalent to CyberArk. No, it's a different company. They are heavily invested into PAM domain. Their product has more features, which Azure native services may not have. But as long as native services are meeting your requirements, why would you invest dollars, thousands of dollars into a third-party solution, which is actually not needed? Cloud is all about cost optimization, and security team must be aware of this objective. Security comes at a cost, so it has to be minimized wherever possible. Okay.
Hi, Raghuveer.
Yeah. Any other question, guys?
Yes, actually, I have a doubt, like maybe a confusion regarding this PAM. See, like in earlier days or the earlier operating systems, we had the groups like power users or print administrators kind of roles in the operating systems. So I was just had this doubt, like if these roles were already present in the operating system, then there wasn't any need like for the PAM service. So that is just a doubt.
There is a need. I'll tell you why do we use a PAM service? Because PAM doesn't only allow you to log in, it can also see if you provide local admin access to a user. See, typically there are two approaches here. Understand why do we need a PAM? Or why organizations are using CyberArk, ForgeRock, Okta, SailPoint, why they are using it. See, when you grant local admin access to an identity, let's say Devraj is the identity and Devraj is added to administrator group. Devraj ID is added to administrator group. So if I go back to the VM, in the VM, since this VM is not joined to the domain, I can go to local user of the VM, local user management. Over here, there is a group with the name administrator. So Devraj is actually part of this user group, right? So that's the reason Devraj is able to actually log into this VM and perform any administrative operations. But you have others also like backup operators, power users, all the activities are there. All the roles are here that you can pick and choose. But then there's a challenge. The challenge is, understand the challenge. If I give a user local administrative access, that identity becomes a privileged identity. What if Devraj is not there in office? Devraj is on vacation and somebody exploits his identity and be able to log into a system. It's a risk, right? That's one thing, that it's a risk that I cannot grant Devraj local administrator access permanently. That's one thing. The second risk is, let's say I don't grant Devraj administrative access. What I typically do, I say, Devraj, I'll give you generic local admin credentials of the server where the disk needs to be added. So I have a common local admin credentials that I've created. Devraj needs to perform this activity. I'll say, Devraj, here's the credential. Please take it and perform the activity. Even though this is local admin credentials, they can get compromised. I'm saying the risk is more here with local admin. The risk is less here with administrator. So what CyberArk is doing? What CyberArk is doing here, that Devraj is not being granted local admin access. Devraj is not being given a generic user credential. Devraj has a cyber. So there is a CyberArk system here, CyberArk PAM. So you create an account of Devraj in CyberArk PAM and you onboard this VM into CyberArk. So you are onboarding. So you are onboarding the server or that VM in CyberArk, and you basically provide admin access to CyberArk. So CyberArk has admin access to the VM. Now, what will happen when Devraj needs to basically log into the VM? Devraj will navigate to the VM in the CyberArk console, and then Devraj, right next to the VM, there will be a connect button. Devraj will click on connect, and Devraj will get local admin access. So when Devraj hits connect and get local admin access, CyberArk never exposed the local admin credentials to Devraj. So Devraj never knows that what is the user ID and password which I'm using to authenticate to the system, which gives me local admin access. That's the first benefit of PAM solution, this local admin access. Second, this local admin access credentials, they are temporary. So these temporary credentials, they change I'm saying you can also configure CyberArk to change the credential every 1 minute. So every minute the local admin credentials are getting changed, which means if Devraj identity is compromised, even though the credentials are changing every minute, so nobody will be able to get the credentials of this server in question, which is my security concern. My server is a SQL server. It's a critical server. That's the benefit that PAM solution, third-party PAM solution will bring on the table. And then some additional benefits, which, as I've already said, which is session recording. It's full session recording or ad hoc screenshots. It can take screenshots of what Devraj was doing, what screens he was in, what activity he was performing, and then logging the activities. That's the another capability that it does. And then CyberArk has other modules also. I'm just talking about the PAM part. So these are the benefits that a PAM solution will bring in over and above the local, the traditional method of using local user administrator and other approaches that you were talking about. Hope that makes sense.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other question, guys?
Raghuveer, the Bastion host is a separate vendor, is it? It's not a service from Azure.
No, it's a service from Azure.
It's Azure. Okay,
yeah.
It's Azure service.
It's here. So you type Bastion You see the service here, Bastion? It's a paid service. I'm saying it typically costs $1 to $2 a day. But this is the service. So you can configure this service Bastion host, and then so this service typically resides in a virtual network. All the VMs which are part of that virtual network can be accessed using Bastion host. It provides you a browser-based RDP and SSH access. So you basically navigate to the service. For example, this is the VM. And let's say this is my production VM. So obviously it doesn't have a public IP here. So what I will do, if I don't have a public IP, how will I connect? So I will click on connect and I see this option connect via Bastion. So I will just select this option. Since I don't have a Bastion, obviously it will not connect. But if I had a Bastion, so it is trying to create a Bastion here, which I don't want because it's a costly service. So what I will do, I will just use this Bastion method that will give me a browser based. It will open another tab on the browser and I will get browser based RDP access, which is a very secure access because it uses TLS in the backend, TLS 1.2. So that's the concept of Bastion host. And once I get the access, the admin can navigate to Bastion host service here. Admin will see one session here on the Bastion host. Admin can click on the session and admin can perform the activity or the capability that Bastion provides. So admin can disconnect the session, admin can enable session recording, admin can enable screenshots, admin can perform multiple activities here. That's how Bastion works in Azure, which I would not say a complete replacement of PAM solution, but at least it does provide you the solution.
Okay, it internally uses port 3389 and 22 only, or another protocol?
You can configure Bastion with any port.
With any protocol. That's a good part about it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then this is also just in time. As I said, you also need to understand the just in time. I'm saying we cannot navigate to just in time right now. It will be too early because we have not started the Defender part. So I'll show you the just in time part when we start the Defender part. So right now we need to enable the plans, something that I will not do today. Otherwise it will be a mix. So, when we do the Defender part, I will exactly show you that the third capability that I was talking about, which is here, the just-in-time access. How do I also enable that capability to provide a comprehensive experience? Now understand the benefit of this approach. Coming back to the identity and access management. So when I was talking about identity and access management, I was talking about some best practices. These were my best practices. So I'll copy these best practices here and put it at the bottom. And then we'll talk about the benefits that it brings on the table. So these were my best practices. Now, let's say, how am I making sure that I'm following the best practices? Time bound. The access should be time bound. So yes, my PIM service that I actually have used that gives me the ability to create a time bound access for my identities, least privilege. So my PIM service, once again, helping me because all my users, whether it's an L1, whether it's an L2, whether it's an L3, whether it's my lead, they all are normal user. Their identity by default has reader role. So since they are normal user, the chances of identity theft, misconfiguration, brute force attack is nil. What is the advantage? What if you're able to compromise a reader identity? What will you do? You can't even do any configuration changes. You can't even perform anything. You can just read the information. So that's the benefit that you get with this approach, right? Because all your identities are by default normal. They are normal user in nature, right? And then separation of duty, which is very important, which basically means that in your team, even if you have L1, L2, and L3, you will always have an SME, somebody who is an expert on a service, and then you will always have all rounders, somebody who knows all the services. So based on an identity and based on the capability of that identity, team size and target operating model, you can always follow principle of separation of duty, wherein you will grant access based on the duty of that identity. So if there is an L3 user, by default, that L3 user will have normal access. But when you configure the PIM for L3 user, you will grant that L3 user some additional roles, which is basically needed for that L3 user to perform job role and function. So that's what you will configure in PIM. Then PIM PAM I've already explained. So this entire is PIM, which basically means that if you really want to have a secure and comprehensive identity and access management configuration in Azure, and if you're not using this Microsoft Entra ID privileged identity management service, you are actually doing nothing. You actually do not have it configured. This is very important service, PIM service. Okay. However, this is a paid service. PIM requires premium P2 license. It requires premium P2 license of Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft licensing is very complex. If you have M365, E5, security and compliance plan, E5 security and compliance, then you don't need the premium P2 license because premium P2 is by default included with it. But if you have M365, E3, then with E3 you get premium P1, and with premium P1 you don't get PIM service. PIM service is not available in this plan. Not available. It's only available in premium P2. But there are additional services which are available in premium P1. So that's how the licensing part is. So I've seen customers ended up paying redundant, I'm saying more than what they actually expect to pay, because what they do, they purchase premium P2 licenses, then they also purchase Microsoft 365, or they are not aware that their existing Microsoft 365 plan makes them eligible for Microsoft Entra ID Premium P2, and they end up purchasing this. Now the question is why Microsoft did not inform them that you already have a plan that covers this license, because no, Microsoft never does that. I'm saying, why would Microsoft lose money? You keep on paying the double money, Microsoft will continue to accept it. The day you go to Microsoft and say, hey, you know what? We just realized that we were paying you double the amount. We had E5 and then premium P2 we also purchased. Microsoft will say, oh, let's cancel it. Then Microsoft will disable your premium P2 and your services will continue to function. So this has happened in the past a number of times with my customers when I kind of inform them that you are unnecessarily overpaying. You are overpaying for your licenses, and that's where they went to Microsoft, and Microsoft said, oh, let's fix it. Let's remove your license. We'll not charge you from next month onward. So this happens
same with Google and AWS also. They will also not let you.
See, the challenge is in Google and so Google has recently introduced PAM service. Google doesn't have PIM service, and AWS also doesn't have PIM service.
No, but my point is if we are just overriding our license, right? Will they not, like AWS and Google will not let the customer know that you are unnecessarily buying this?
I can't comment on Google. I've not seen that incident, but AWS is very transparent. You will not. So AWS licensing is not that complex. Why? Because AWS doesn't sell operating system. They don't make operating systems. They only provide cloud services. Why Microsoft licensing is complicated? Because they have multiple licensing arrangements. So you have Microsoft volume licensing, you have enterprise agreement, which also enables you for cloud services. And then sometimes what happens, you start with Microsoft 365, but you never. So imagine an organization which is a very old customer of Microsoft. So you have Microsoft Exchange, then you migrated to M365, and later on you subscribe to Azure. So Microsoft never does that. But there is another, see, it's two-way. Customer also doesn't tell Microsoft that they are underpaying and overusing their licenses. Sometimes you purchase 10 licenses and you provision 20 servers. You also don't tell Microsoft. You also don't, you're also not honest. How does Microsoft come to know? When Microsoft performs an audit, then Microsoft comes to know. Similarly, when somebody wakes you up, some external consultant comes to your place and say, hey, as part of your FinOps strategy or as part of your cost optimization strategy, when you come to know, oh, I was unnecessarily overpaying, then Microsoft only removes that license. They never say that, okay, we realize that you were doing it for the last 3 years. Let us give you the money back. No, it's both way. Microsoft doesn't charge you for overutilizing their licenses. Similarly, they will not pay you back for overpaying them for licenses. It's a two-way, road.
No, thanks. Ravi, just if you can spend 2 more minutes on that example that you have given, the adding 100 GB to that disk, right? So correct. So the bullet point number 1 was performed by a user called Devraj on Azure portal, correct?
Yep.
And then because he was a read-only user, he needed some additional privileges to add a disk and all, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't have seen that button itself. So
absolutely, yep.
Correct. So for giving those additional roles to Devraj, who is part of the Entra ID, the PIM license was required, right?
Absolutely, PIM license was required. So
right.
I'll show you.
So yeah, so assume that PIM we have P1, right? And the PIM licensing is not bought by the customer. So would it not be ever possible to add a disk in that case?
No, it will still be possible, but in that case, you will not use this service. The admin will directly elevate the permissions of Devraj. So Devraj will go to admin and say, hey, I want to add a disk. For that, I need storage admin role. So admin will go to subscriptions. Click on the subscription, go to access management, then click on add role assignment. And here admin will select the role and select Devraj identity. But it's a manual process.
Yeah, in case of PIM, Devraj himself will request for that access. He will initiate that request.
So in case of PIM, Devraj will type PIM. Devraj will navigate to the screen. Here, Devraj will see Azure resources because this is an Azure role. Sorry, activity. So because this is not configured. So Devraj will click on here, my roles, right? Over here, Devraj will click on Azure resources, and here Devraj will see all the eligible assignments. So Devraj, from this list, this is something that we will do tomorrow. From this list, Devraj will select a role that has been, Devraj will select an assignment that has been allowed by his admin. So Devraj will click on the role, and right hand side, there will be an option to elevate. So Devraj will click on elevate. Now, depending on whether that elevation is instant or it triggers an approval workflow. Let's say this is instant. So the moment Devraj clicks on elevate, it will show you the process flow, and Devraj will be elevated for the time frame that admin has configured, like 4 hours. Now for next 4 hours, Devraj has admin access, which allows him to add a disk in Azure portal. That's the first option. Second is, what if Devraj is what if the request says that delete the VM? Now, deleting a resource, a production resource, is a privileged activity once again. So probably for that, Devraj needs admin access. That access is listed here. But for that access, when Devraj clicks on elevate, it will trigger an approval workflow. The request will go to the manager. Now, what manager will do? Manager will also have access to the same portal. So manager will come to this portal and manager will say approve request over here. Now, when manager says approve request, manager will click on Azure resources and manager will see a request here for Devraj. This is where manager will see a request underneath here. So manager will select the request and either approve or deny. Now, when manager denies it, manager can send a justification that why manager is denying it. That's what will happen. So the same portal will be used by user as well as admin. For user to elevate the request, for admin to to approve the animation.
Correct.
That's where it will happen.
So all the workflows will be managed within the portal. Otherwise, if you don't have PIM, then you have to do all these activities outside Azure, and only the administrator will come and then give you those roles, right?
See, if PIM is not there, then there is another option, which is identity governance. You can basically come here, security. Identity protection. Protect. Okay, give me a moment here. Okay, over here. So I'm saying you just need this, this license first of all. So over here, I would say you can configure. Okay, give me a moment. See, what Microsoft has done, they have done a lot of changes to the UI. Oh, it is here, identity governance. So over here, and under entitlement management, let's say you don't use PIM, then you can use this method, entitlement management. Here you can create an access package that has all the permissions which are typically needed by a user based on his or her role. Let's say L1, L2, L3. So you will create an access package and you will assign that access package to the user. Now what user will do, whenever user needs access, whenever user needs to perform privileged activity, am I still there? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so whenever user needs to perform an elevated activity, what user will do, user will go to this website, which is myaccess.microsoft.com. This is a lengthy method which was present before PIM service was introduced. So this is how I would, I still remember working as an administrator back in 2014, some 10, 11 years ago. I would use this method basically. So this is what I would configure for users when PIM was not there.
So you're still logging in as an end user, right? Who is seeking that access?
Yeah. Okay, so you cannot log in with this user. If you want to go to my access, because this Devraj Sharma is the account admin, right? So basically, typically what happens in your Entra ID, you will have identities created. So you will log in with that identity, right? A typical identity. That identity will type myaccess.microsoft.com, and then the identity will see all the access package that has been granted to him. So identity will pick up the access package and activate it. Now access package has a deadline. Access package has a review. So the identity administrator will periodically review all the access package and the accesses that are granted in that access package. And accordingly, administrator will keep on adding new accesses or will keep on removing the existing accesses. So it's more of a lengthy exercise, cumbersome exercise that we would perform before privileged identity management service was introduced. But now that we have a privileged identity management service, we stopped doing that access management part. We directly use privileged identity management, which is more automated and more straightforward and involves less admin intervention. That's what we do.
Right. Now the second part was done. The disk was added because he had those elevated accesses, right, through PIM.
Yep.
The second part, to connect through RDP. If a normal user connects again in the device management, he did not have that option. So you logged in as a privileged user.
Privileged user,
right? And then
that is outside of Azure. That has nothing
that is
to do
outside
with
of Azure. That is for that particular VM. Right.
Absolutely.
And then that falls into PAM.
That was into PAM, and PAM is not the service which is in Azure. So for PAM, what you do, you directly grant access. I'm saying PAM, you typically manage using Active Directory, wherein you can add that user to probably a group which manages local admin access, which is either a power user group or a remote desktop user group or a local admin. So PAM is done through Active Directory. And if you need a full-fledged PAM solution, I'm saying you can also do some aspect of PAM through Western host. But if you really need a full-fledged PAM solution, you need to look beyond Azure, because as we speak, Azure doesn't have a full-fledged PAM solution.
Okay, okay. But both that Azure user and Devraj both were Entra ID users only, end of the day, of the same tenant.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
They are Entra ID users. And in fact, they are not, in fact, the Devraj identity is not created in Entra ID. It is getting synchronized from on-premises, from using Microsoft Entra ID AD Connect, the lab that we will do tomorrow. We all will do that lab tomorrow. Any resource that we will create a lab, we will retain that resource till the end of the trade, because we will continue to use that resource somewhere down the line. So, I'm almost done with the theoretical aspects. So what we are going to do tomorrow, the first thing when we start the session tomorrow, we will build a machine that will be elevated as domain controller, that will have Microsoft Windows Server Active Directory role on it. On that machine, we will create some identities. Then we will use Microsoft Entra ID, a connect service, to synchronize those identities from machine, from that on-premises Active Directory to Azure. So we will assume that the machine is not in Azure, it is actually an on-premises domain controller. But since we don't have access to on-premises, so we build our machine in Azure. Then from that Active Directory machine, we will synchronize all the identities in Microsoft Entra ID. After that, we will configure MFA, we will configure SSO, we will configure privileged identity management. So the entire session tomorrow includes the hands-on lab, which includes the hands-on lab for the topics which are there in the TOC. Obviously, to be honest, I have so I typically deliver a separate training on Microsoft Entra ID, which spans across 5 days, 40 hours. And in that training, I actually cover every minute aspect of Microsoft Entra ID that you see here in this portal, everything which is there in Entra ID. So since we only got 5 hours for covering this topic, I have already identified the topics that we need to do, which is identity federation, MFA, and PIM. Those are the 3 topics that we will cover in Entra ID. If you need more topics, I would say if you have interest in more topics, then as I said, you can probably so that the recording that we have put, does it contain the other information? Entra ID, the 4 part, 3 parts. Does it contain the other information? Yes. Okay. So guys, what you can do on my channel under Azure, you have a 3-part session on Microsoft Entra ID that is divided into 3 parts. You can probably refer to those session recordings wherein you will see some additional aspects of Microsoft Entra ID, because those 3 parts are approximately that I covered for the entire day. So definitely you will have more about Microsoft Entra ID. But in this training, our focus is on 3 services, which I've just talked about.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's going to be an exciting day tomorrow.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the reason. That's the reason I wanted to make sure that I cover the theoretical aspects today only. Now, let's understand the other aspects of Entra ID. Okay, we will also do conditional access, which is great. Identity. Yeah. The other aspect is zero trust. What is zero trust here? See, you've heard zero trust terminology when you hear zero trust, the first thing that comes to your mind is network security, because zero trust was introduced by NIST, and NIST is a non-profit body which is highly invested into network security. So their cybersecurity framework is more about network security framework, and they basically introduced the terminology of zero trust. So first understand what zero trust is. Can somebody explain what is zero trust? If you've heard this terminology in the past, or anything that comes to your mind by reading zero trust.
Zero trust, so it means trust nothing. Whatever is happening in
nothing,
your
which is good.
infrastructure, whatever is happening in your infrastructure, whatever is happening in your environment, question everything. Whatever that is suspicious, whatever that is you don't know, whatever that is your analyst doesn't know about, whatever that your customers don't know, question everything. That's what the zero trust basically means. The trust nothing about the network. In terms of network security, means network security first of all comes into with respect to the firewall.
Yeah.
Whatever kind of traffic and packet, packet ongoing and outgoing and incoming packets. So trust each and every don't trust any packets that is going incoming in your network and outgoing from your network. So with respect to the network security, that means that.
Okay. All right. Any other participant? Any other participant who would like to explain what zero trust is? Okay, so
We
I
cannot,
put the URL Dhananjay there. Never assume, always investigate, which is right. Sai Prashant, you're almost there. Okay, so there are
we
three
cannot take
principles of zero
decisions.
trust.
We cannot take any decisions based on the assumptions. Like that is called zero trust.
Okay, so if you go by NIST, what NIST says, so zero trust basically means 3 steps. 1, trust nobody. Trust nobody. And if you don't trust nobody, then what you do? Always verify. This happens in defense. In defense, when you go to a defense establishment, irrespective of who you are, what level you are at, whether you are a brigadier, whether you are a general, whether you are a colonel, if you're not wearing your badge, the person who is managing the security will not recognize you. Though the person knows that you are brigadier, your colonel, your general, and the person sees you every day, the person recognizes you by your face, but since you're not wearing your badge, you will not be allowed to step in. It's a discipline that they follow. So they don't trust. It says trust nobody, always verify. You need to show your badge, then you are allowed in. And they follow this discipline very sincerely. Right? That's zero trust. Trust nobody, always verify. Second, assume breach has happened. That's the second thing. What NIST says that the administrator, the security team should always assume that breach has happened. Because if they assume that breach has happened, they will always think of containing it. They will always think of ways to contain it, to stop it. So assume that breach has happened. Never sleep peacefully. Always think that something is not right in my environment. Something is broken. That's the second thing it says. Trust nobody, always verify, assume breach has happened. And third is optimize the security controls. That's zero trust as per this. Now the question is, what is zero trust? In the context of identity and access management. This is in the context of network security. Trust nobody, always verify, assume breach has happened, optimize the security controls. But the question is what it is in the context of identity and access management. So Microsoft has a very descriptive document that they put together on zero trust in the context of identity and access management. I'll share the document with you. So this is the documentation that says securing identities with zero trust. I'll share this documentation in the chat window, guys. Please go through this documentation. This gives you a lot of knowledge. So as once again, I repeat myself, tool comes at a second stage. First, understand the services, then think of securing them. If you directly try to secure a service, your security will always be incomplete. It will be full of misconfigurations. It will be full of gaps. So this is how it says securing identities with zero trust. So it basically, this article basically explains that what is zero trust here and how do you identity zero trust deployment guide, that how do you deploy zero trust here. So you get some information here from the identity governance perspective. Now, this is the most important thing which comes under zero trust, which is conditional access policy. So what basically happens when a user, so how are we deploying zero trust here? Let's go back to the document and see, you read the document, but I'll share my experience here directly without. So the first thing is least privilege principle. Least privilege principle is the method that helps you implement zero trust, which is how normal users, normal identities all the time. Trust nobody, always verify, which means all the identities are normal. They are regular identities, or let's say reader identities. My L3 is also a reader. My L1 is also a reader. So I'm not trusting. I am verifying. How do I verify? When these people needs to perform elevated activities, when these people needs to perform elevated administrative work or configuration management or work on a change request which requires privileges, then I will verify them. How do I verify? Through PIM. So I have configured PIM for all my employees, all my identities, whether they are L1, whether they are L3, whether they are lead, whether they are manager, they all need to follow PIM. There is no exception to PIM. Even the manager, director, they need to follow PIM, so that every minute elevated access or elevated activity that they perform is recorded. Because if you don't have PIM for your manager can log into a service, perform some activity and get untraced. But when you have PIM, you can download the PIM logs and you can identify which user in the last 7 days, how many times performed an elevated work. So that's PIM. Trust nobody, always verify. Least privilege principle. Am I making sense, guys? Yes, no, maybe? Yeah. Okay. Next is assume breach has happened. So you need to assume that there are configuration challenges, there are misconfiguration, there are gaps in the environment. And for that, you will use conditional access. Conditional access basically means that based on the signals, which is device type, identity type, whether it's an external or internal, whether it's a member or guest identity, location, IP address, browser, etc. Based on these signals, you will grant access. So when an identity tries to access the Azure portal or any application that is authenticated and authorized through Azure portal, any third-party application, based on the signal, which is the device type that the identity is using, whether that device is registered or unknown. Identity type, whether that identity is a member or a guest in the Entra ID. Location, whether that location is regular or unusual. IP address, whether that IP address is known or blacklisted. Browser, whether that browser is Chrome, Edge, or Firefox, or Safari, etc. Based on these signals, you will allow access to the identity. So if you're trying to, let's say, the example of this, we will do the lab here also tomorrow when we configure the licensing. So what we will do, we will configure access, and then we will ask our identities to log in. So when I say ask our identities, you will do everything. You will do the entire simulation. You will become a hacker, and then you will become the admin at the same time. So you will basically imitate one identity that doesn't have access. And with that identity, you will try to access the system. And you will see that how conditional access service is quick to identify the behavior based on the device type, based on the identity type, based on the location, based on the IP address, or based on the browser, and it will either allow access or deny access. That's what conditional access will do, which is assume breach has happened. So you will always assume that breach has happened, and that is why you will have policies that will every time filter the traffic, or that will every time scan the request that is coming to the portal or to the application. So that's the conditional access part. Then the third part is optimize the security controls. So how do you optimize the security controls? For that, you have GRC, and as part of GRC, you have Azure policy, you have Microsoft Defender for cloud with CSPM capability. With CSPM capability, you will always know that what is my secure score and what are my scope of improvements to improve my secure score, which automatically aligns me with optimizing the security controls. And you will also have Azure policy. So that's what you will do, from the optimizing controls perspective. So that's the zero trust in the context of identity and access management. Now you will go ahead and read that documentation as your home assignment today, and see if you have any questions around this documentation, because this will help you when you work with Microsoft Sentinel, when you work with Microsoft Defender for endpoint, when you work with Microsoft Cloud App Security. Those three solutions are directly related to zero trust. So this is what you need to do. This is the zero trust deployment guide series for identities for endpoints. So you will click on this guide series. This is basically for identities. So how do you? So I'm saying it brings you back to the same page. This is zero trust for identities. If you have additional interest, you can also read about zero trust for endpoints, zero trust for applications, zero trust for data, infrastructure, network, and automation and orchestration. And the first one is zero trust, documentation. So I'll also share the documentation with you, wherein you can see the zero trust concepts and other things about it. Yeah, that's right side. So the access to user is not directly granted. Just because the user is a regular user, the user is a manager, or the request comes from that user every day at 9 o'clock from the same device, from the same browser, from the same IP address. No, every time the user is trying to log in, the user is getting validated. This happens all the time. If the user is logging in 20 times a day, this conditional access will work every time. That's where we assume that the breach has happened. Every time the Entra ID will assume that this is not a legitimate request. Maybe the user is not legitimated, device is not legitimate, IP address or location is not legitimate, browser is not legitimate. And this does not only held true for portal access, this is also held true for applications. I'm saying it is not only for Azure portal. You can have Azure portal configured. You can have M365 portal configured. You can configure SharePoint Online, You can configure Dynamics CRM, and you can also configure enterprise applications that you onboard in Microsoft Azure. So you can have applications like SAP, Hyperion, Adobe, Workday. I'm saying any application that comes to your mind. You can also have those applications configured for 0x, zero trust, which means every time your users are trying to access those applications, this zero trust will trigger, and this zero trust will, based on these assets or these signals, will either allow that user to access these applications, will deny access, or will prompt for additional authentication. It will prompt for additional authentication. For example, user always uses Microsoft Edge, but today user is using Chrome. The IP address is same, the location is same, the device is same, but the browser is changing. So it could be a browser-based attack. So it will prompt for additional authentication, which is probably an MFA will trigger that will send a code to user on her email, mobile, or authenticator application. So all three activities will happen. Either the access will be allowed, access will be denied, or there will be an additional factor authentication will get triggered, because the service is getting, I'm saying out of 100%, user is authenticated 80%. For remaining 20%, the service will prompt for additional authentication. And the service also has the capability, in case of user is not authenticating, the service has the capability to disable the user. So service will quickly disable the user. If service gets constant request from the user and user doesn't provide the authentication, then the service has the capability to disable the user. And when service disables the user, it is followed by a security incident in the Sentinel or any other security solution, which is integrated with Azure. So the point that I'm trying to make here is, I don't want to confuse you guys, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that Microsoft has immense possibility when it comes to security controls, when it comes to configurations. Sometimes what happens, you don't understand Microsoft Azure well, and you actually move towards a third-party solutions. You start using Splunk, you start using, let's say, CrowdStrike, Falcon, you start using Palo Alto Prisma, you start using, CyberArk or SailPoint for SSO and identity and access management. Just try and understand the capability that cloud brings on the table. Now, since I'm a Microsoft person, I've been a Microsoft person right from day one, starting with 2010 when this service was launched. I was probably the first among the first 100 people who evaluated this service and shared the feedback with Microsoft as part of my employer. And since then, there has been no looking back. So I have seen Microsoft services or Microsoft security portfolio evolving over the last couple of years very closely. And today, when somebody invites me for consulting, and when I get to hear that they are using third-party solutions, I would always ask them questions that what is it that prompted or encouraged them to use third party? What exactly was missing in native solution? And as part of the discussion, sometimes I come to know that they were not even aware of these capabilities. They never knew that Microsoft has conditional access capability, and they ended up using Zscaler internet access. They ended up using CASB solutions from Netspoke or other companies. When you have this solution, I'm saying you bring any use case to me that a CASB solutions can address. I can configure that in conditional access. And with conditional access, you don't pay even a single penny extra, because conditional access is part of premium P1 plan or premium P2 plan. and you already have paid for that plan to get additional services like PIM or other capabilities that Azure provides. So yes, with the help of Microsoft security solutions, you can reduce your overall security cost by up to 70% when you use it to the fullest capability. And you can also increase your security posture up to 95 to 99%. I would not say 100%, nothing is 100%, but you can increase it also. It's just that you need to understand what my problem statements are and then whether there's a solution in Azure. Okay. So this is about Microsoft Entra ID, guys. Now we have almost reached to the end of the session, and I'm a bit tired also because I've been talking at a stretch for the last couple of hours. So any other questions that you have before I share some documentation that you need to study today before you appear for session tomorrow? Because tomorrow is entire configuration, hands-on lab configuration. So I want you to study a couple of things. First, I want you to study about Microsoft Active Directory basics. So you need to know what Microsoft Active Directory is, what is a site, what is an OU, what is a domain controller, what are FSMO roles. This is all you need to know. These are prerequisites for tomorrow. So you need to study Microsoft Active Directory basics. You need to navigate to various capabilities that Microsoft Entra ID list on its dashboard. Just go through the dashboard of Microsoft Entra ID and see what all capabilities are there in Entra ID. Look for study about Microsoft Entra ID features, capabilities, licensing. I'll share the URLs with you also. This is the documentation for Microsoft Entra ID. Okay, directly to me. This is the documentation for Microsoft Entra ID. Make sure you go through this documentation. I'll put that into the chat window also, guys. What you need to study, I'll put that into the chat window. So Microsoft Entra ID, as I said, you also have, I've said this information is also available in my session recording. So you can also find it on my channel. I have some videos for Microsoft Entra for Microsoft configuration also. Okay, then comes so you study about Microsoft Entra ID capabilities, licensing, you navigate through various capabilities that it provides. Then you need to have fundamental understanding of what is a single sign-on. I'm saying overview, features, functioning. This you need to know what ADFS is, which is Active Directory Federation Services. You need to know what MFA is. I'm saying, why do we need overview, significance, features, use cases, types. This is what you need to know as a prerequisite tomorrow. Yeah, and then in the end, cryptography. which is encryption, which is symmetric, asymmetric, and key management. That's it. So this is your assignment for today, for tonight. Before we start the session tomorrow, please make sure that you go through these topics. You study these topics because this is exactly what we are going to cover tomorrow. And obviously, I will not be covering the theoretical aspects. I would expect you to go through those aspects. However, while going through those aspects, if you have any questions, make a note of it. Discuss it with me first thing in the afternoon when we start the session, so that you will be able to complete the lab. Now, the another thing that you need to remember, I know some participants are kind of sleeping. They are either, I'm saying they either understand all the concepts, so they don't feel like asking questions. Some participants are probably keeping themselves on mute, and I don't know whether they are in the session. They are probably doing some office work, or they are not even at the system at all. The reason I'm not putting people on spot, because this is an advanced training. This training is on Microsoft security. This involves a lot of services, and this is totally on your wish. If you wish to learn, you will learn. If you feel that you are forced into this training, you will probably not learn. So it's on, it's all your wish. So please make sure that you remain attentive. You ask questions. Don't just assume, and don't feel bad that what others will think. I'm somebody who can speak at a stretch for hours, and I do not feel bad when people ask questions. I take it as an opportunity to share my knowledge and experience. If I don't know the answer, I will honestly say I don't know. But the next day, or probably in next couple of hours, I will get back to you with the answer. So please ask questions, whatever comes to your mind related to cybersecurity, related to cloud security, related to AWS, Azure, GCP. I will answer to those questions to the best of my capability and experience. But please remain attentive. I do not expect you to share, I'm say keep your camera on, because I respect your privacy. But this is an opportunity that you must not miss, because this training got postponed again and again. And finally, we were able to start this training. So take advantage of this training. These session recordings will be made available to you. I'm say after this training is over, it will take a couple of minutes for these recordings to get converted into a format. Then I will share the URL that you can navigate to access these session recordings. So you can access the session recordings also. You have recorded session on my channel also. You can find it from there. But tomorrow, I want you all to come prepared by taking an overview of these services, so that when we start with the lab, hands-on lab, none of you are left behind. I'm saying I would say all the participants, each one of you should be able to do the lab along with me, because if you are not able to do the lab tomorrow, trust me, you will lose interest in the training tomorrow itself, because day after tomorrow, what I will cover will be a reflection of what was covered the previous day. So the lab that we will build tomorrow is not the only lab that we will build. It is lab in continuation. Tomorrow we will do Entra ID part, when we will configure SSO, we'll configure identity federation, we'll configure conditional access, we will configure PIM, we will configure MFO. Then the day after, we will be doing encryption. So what are we encrypting? The data that we are storing in Active Directory, the data that we are storing in virtual machines. Day after tomorrow, we will do network security. What are we securing? The network access to the virtual machines that you provision tomorrow in the form of Active Directory, in the form of other services. After that, probably next week, we are doing endpoint detection and response. What are we protecting? The same Active Directory server that we will provision tomorrow. We will do Sentinel. What are we taking logs from? The same servers that we will tomorrow. So the lab that we are building tomorrow is not the last and final. We will continue to evolve. So if you are left behind tomorrow, trust me, it will really be hard for you to come back uh, and be on the same page. So from tomorrow onwards, Please make sure that you remain attentive. And if you are lagging behind, stop me then and there and say, please give me some time. I'm lagging behind. I need to be on the same page. I need to be at the same pace. And I won't mind that. So this is what my expectation from tomorrow is. Please make sure, guys, let's do this training as effective as possible. And that's it. That's it for today. I'm open to questions if you have any. Otherwise, we'll close the session.